morning, everybody. Good morning. It's JPR, and yep, I'm still in Anaheim for Pokemon World. So you know what that means? It's time for totally not just another compilation video. No, please don't leave. So kick your feet up, maybe fall asleep watching this video. I mean, you probably will, and enjoy the worst Pokemon in every single region. The original 151 Pokemon have been revisited enough times to make the average fan sick, and despite that fact, there are still quite a few Pokemon from the Kanto region who are absolute stinkers. So good morning, everybody, good morning, it's JPR, and today I'm going to be breaking down who the worst Pokemon from the Kanto region truly are. This will primarily be a breakdown of how these Pokemon perform within the region of Kanto itself, which means since all the Kanto-based games act like the future evolutions like Crobat and Kingdra don't exist, then so will I. I will treat the originals as fully evolved Pokemon within the Kanto region. And yes, fully evolved Pokemon only, which means Magikarp will not be on this list, you're welcome. However, a Pokemon can dodge this list if they have some sort of competitive viability, be it singles or VGC. This is just for Pokemon who strictly have no purpose competitively or casually speaking. Number 10, Pidgeot. Probably not the Pokemon you expected to start this list off, right? After all, Pidgeot is a pretty popular team pick, has a Mega Evolution in Let's Go, and a hairstyle that defined an entire generation. He can't be that bad, right? And it's true, stat-wise, Pidgeot is nowhere near a bottom 10 Kanto Pokemon. But the issue is, Pidgeot is completely obsolete next to the Pokemon that it ironically overshadows most of the time, Fearow. For starters, since Gust isn't a flying type move in Gen 1, don't ask me why, I didn't code the game, I think it's stupid too, the Pidgey family doesn't get a single flying type attack until Wing Attack at level 31. Whereas Spearow comes equipped with Peck right away, instantly giving it better coverage, especially for Viridian Forest. Even in Fire Red and Leaf Green, you have to grind Pidgey to level 9 to get Gust, which is now a flying type move, but by then, I'm already halfway through the forest where Pidgey is supposed to be the most useful. And while Fearow doesn't learn its best move Drill Peck until level 34, it's worth waiting out those 3 extra levels because of how much stronger Drill Peck is than Wing Attack, especially in Gen 1, where Wing Attack is the same base power as Peck, which Fearow has had since birth. And that's not even to mention that Fearow reaches its final form a whole 16 levels earlier than Pidgeot. And it has better distributed stats than Pidgeot, boasting way higher speed and attack, at least in Gens 1 through 5, as Pidgeot is now 1 point faster than Fearow as of Gen 6. And the Mega Evolution? Forget about it, it's post-game only, and Let's Go doesn't even have enough post-game trainers to warrant a conversation about that. But even if you're considering Mega Pidgeot more broadly speaking, it is one of the least used Mega Evolutions. It has never had a strong VGC presence, it was okay in singles for the few years it was around, but that's really all that can be said about it. Number 9, Rapidash. I know, you're stunned that you haven't seen Tangela yet, but just like Pidgeot, Rapidash's biggest problem is the competition it faces from fellow Kanto region fire types. Sometimes your biggest homies are your biggest ops. Growlithe and Vulpix are both available significantly earlier in the game, whereas in most games, Ponyta is not available until reaching Cinnabar Island or the Sevi Islands. Yeah, it's not even in Kanto in Fire Red and Leaf Green. And while it is available around the same time as the other two in Yellow and Let's Go, where it gets moved to Route 17, aka Cycling Road, the fact that it evolves into Rapidash at level 40 significantly hinders its usefulness, as you can just use a Firestone to evolve Growlithe or Vulpix way earlier. And since most of the trainers that are weak to fire are towards the middle point of the game, you really don't want to wait that long to get your fully evolved fire type. Like, congrats, you finally evolved. Now you're gonna get Earthquaked by Giovanni, Surfed by Lorelei, Rock Slided by Bruno, and completely walled out by Lance. Even Magmar is better because he at least gets Thunder Punch. Rapidash has also brought the rear among all of Kanto's fire types in every single generation's competitive rule sets. Arcanine at least has a Hisuian form and some VGC representation, Ninetales was a Gen 5 Weather Warrior, Charizard got 2 very relevant Megas and a G-Max form, and Magmar, well, he got Magmortar, and Flareon? Okay, maybe it's better than Flareon, but still, Firestone, it's better for Kanto than Rapidash. Rapidash sadly has no way to compete with any of Kanto's fire types, be it main story, VGC, singles, it is sadly outclassed in every context. Number 8, Electrode. Electrode is basically just Raichu or Electabuzz, but with infinitely worse coverage and stats that are distributed worse than Pokemon cards are in 2025. The only reason Electrode isn't lower on this list is for the fact that in general, electric types are very valuable in the Kanto region. There are a significant amount of water and flying type trainers that they beat. They perform pretty decently in the late game and beat quite a few Elite Four members Pokemon. I would still prefer any other Kanto region electric type on my team than Electrode, but given its high speed and the fact that it can just learn Stab Thunderbolt is enough to keep it relatively high up on this list. Still, Electrode isn't a very impressive Pokemon, and even its Hisuian revision did little to boost this Pokemon's competitive viability. Number 7, Seadra. In a sea of spectacular water-type Pokemon, Seadra is quite washed up. Actually, that implies that Seadra was ever good. Let's just say, Kingdra exists for a reason. Let's focus on some positives though. In Gen 1, Seadra has a pretty high special stat, making it quite bulky and allows it to use powerful moves like Surf and Blizzard quite well. Although, it loses 50 points of special defense in the subsequent Kanto games, making this Pokemon extremely frail. And in Let's Go, they at least lean more into its Dragon aspect, giving it Dragon Pulse at level 42, so it can at least match up against Lance decently well. And that's pretty much where all the positives stop. Nothing else about this Pokemon is remotely redeeming. Please use any other Gen 1 water type. Use Blastoise, use Poliwrath, use Cloyster, even Golduck! It's the same Pokemon but bulkier and has Calm Mind. It's just better! In fact, use anything aside from number 6, Seaking. That's right, there is one Kanto region water type worse than Seadra, and that is Seaking. Purely just because it has lower speed and lower special attack than Seadra does, so it's even less threatening somehow. Seaking is unfortunately just a victim of old Pokemon mechanics, as it's built to be a rare water type physical attacker, but water is purely a special type until Gen 4. So for 2 of the 3 Kanto-based games, it's completely useless. It is slightly better in Let's Go. You know what? I might even say it's better than Seadra in Let's Go, because it at least gets Waterfall pretty early on, it learns some more TMs, it's still far from the best water-type Pokemon, but it's a slight improvement. That's all I can give it though. Seadra and Seaking also share a common flaw in the fact that they evolve relatively late by Kanto water-type standards, evolving at levels 32 and 33. Wartortle is a far better mid-game Pokemon, Poliwhirl evolves at level 25 and still has room to grow. Shellder and Staryu are both Waterstone evolutions with evolved forms that have more than enough competitive history on their side. Also, Gyarados and Vaporeon are from this region and need no introduction. You can also get almost all of those Pokemon I just mentioned way earlier in the game too, whereas you need Surf or a Good Rod to catch a Horsey or Goldeen, neither of which you are getting until Fuchsia City, which is so late in the adventure that they functionally have no purpose. Hey, if you're enjoying this video and you want to see more, then make absolutely sure you're subscribed. There's a good chance that I turn this into a series for every single region, so definitely don't miss out. Number 5, Arbok. Arbok is pretty much just as useless as Seadra or Seaking, except it has a way worse typing. Being a pure poison type in Kanto is pain. First of all, Kanto has more poison types than any other region, which all resist themselves. There are no fairy types unless you're playing Let's Go, and even then, no significant trainer really uses them aside from that one weird battle against Mina after the SS Anne. I don't know if I classify that as a significant fight though, and nearly every Kanto grass type is also part poison, so you don't really even beat them. I mean, you lose to Sabrina, you don't do any damage to Koga, you lose to Giovanni, you don't do anything against the League. It is hard to find a reason to use Arbok in Kanto. Arbok also has one of the worst move pools in Pokemon history. In Let's Go, it gets Sucker Punch and Poison Jab pretty early, which is nice, but aside from that one game, Arbok has pretty much nothing. In Fire Red Leaf Green, without TMs, Arbok's most powerful move is Bite or Stab Acid, both at 60 power. Yes, it does get spit up later on, but that requires setup and is honestly way too late to even be relevant or good. Number 4, Farfetch'd. You know, we all know why Farfetch'd is bad. Here, look at its base stats. That's all the reason I need to justify Farfetch'd being on this list. So obviously, since we already know that, here are some reasons why Farfetch'd is not number 1 on this list, despite having maybe the worst stats in all of Kanto. And that reason is the People's Champ. The one, the only, Sheding! As the only Farfetch'd you can use in Red and Blue or Fire Red and Leaf Green, Sheding single-handedly carries this Pokemon out of the bottom 3. First of all, in Fire Red and Leaf Green, Chiding is always holding the leek, formerly known as the stick, which increases Farfetch'd critical hit rate by 2 stages. 2! That's a lot! Furthermore, Farfetch'd is already one of the fastest Pokemon to level up from Gen 1, but since you can only get it from an in-game trade, that means Farfetch'd will be the fastest leveling Pokemon that you get in the entire game. And in the early portion where a few levels make a big difference, Chiding is not a bad temporary team member. And that concludes my defense of Farfetch'd. Chiding for president, make it happen. Unfortunately, literally none of these points work in Farfetch'd favor in Let's Go, where Chiding no longer exists, but it at least has 90 base attack as of Gen 7, so that's the good news. It's still not bottom 3. Number 3, Parasect. I'm gonna be real, there is one reason and one reason alone to use Parasect, and that is Spore. But that's assuming you even get to use Spore, because you know what Parasect is weak to? Everything! In Gen 1, it is the only Pokemon, aside from Paras, to ever have 3 double weaknesses: Fire, Flying, and Poison. And maybe the worst part is, you don't even get Parasect until level 24. If it maybe evolved earlier like Butterfree or Beedrill, you could maybe justify using it for a decent stretch of the game, but no, by the time you reach level 24, everything is knocking you out. The sheer amount of weaknesses this Pokemon has makes it borderline unusable. It is good for putting Pokemon to sleep so you can catch them and hopefully replace Parasect in the process. Number 2, Lickitung. Honestly, it was a toss-up between Lickitung and Porygon for this slot because they both fill the same role of underwhelming Gen 1 normal type to a fantastic degree, but Porygon at least gets Lock-On and Zap Cannon in Gen 3, not a bad combo, and they have at least substantially improved Porygon's moveset over the years. Lickitung is a Pokemon that I am convinced that Game Freak has been trying to forget about since it was created. First of all, I had never seen Lickitung stats until making this video. I always assumed that it was a decently tanky Pokemon with some okay attack, and boy, was I wrong. Oh, but JPR, Lickitung is one of the best Pokemon in Little Cup. Dog, if you are using Little Cup to justify a Pokemon, you have barked up the wrong tree. I need you to go outside and touch a real tree. The best part of Lickitung is that he can't mess up your Nuzlocke encounter, because at least in the Kanto region, he's only ever been a trade Pokemon or post-game in the Cerulean Cave. Unless you're playing Japanese Blue, where he's in the Safari Zone, but then my next question is, why are you Nuzlocking Japanese Blue? There's like 20 Kanto region games, and that's the one that you're choosing to play? Before we get to number 1, here are some dishonorable mentions. I'm sure you expected to see Dugong at some point in this video, and while it is true that Dugong has never been a remotely competitive Pokemon and is completely outclassed by the Lapras you get for free at Silphco, Dugong actually has a phenomenal matchup spread for the late game. And say if you're Nuzlocking and your Lapras is sadly no longer in this world, I wouldn't be upset about picking up a Dugong to the Seafoam Islands. I have actually used one to pretty good success in a Fire Red Nuzlocke before. That's pretty much the only context that Dugong is good in, but it's good enough to dodge this list. Next is Persian. Persian is a Pokemon that is absolutely horrible nowadays, but given how threatening this Pokemon was in Gen 1, not just in the main story, but especially in competitive 1v1s, I could not confidently place it in the list. In the department of Gen 1's many overshadowed water types, Kingler was quite close to making it. In fact, it is actually just the worst Kanto water type in the Gen 1 and Gen 3 games. But since the physical special splits, Kingler can actually make its massive attack stat work for it. Yes, it has to wait until level 41 and Let's Go to get its best move, Crab Hammer, but it has plenty of powerful TM options to choose from in the meantime. Beedrill also sucks, but evolves very early and has literally the only good bug move in Gen 1, and it kinda destroys Erica's gym, so it has a niche at least. Speaking of bugs, Pinsir was quite terrible, but has a Mega Evolution that is actually quite good. It's never really been VGC relevant, but in singles, Pinsir is actually quite a powerful Pokemon, even if it's not so great within the Kanto region itself. And lastly, Ditto. This Pokemon is pretty much unusable for the main story run because it can never have Imposter in the Kanto-based games, but in online play, Ditto is actually sometimes kinda good. It might be the only Pokemon in this video who ever sees any form of VGC usage. Which brings us to the number 1 worst Kanto region Pokemon. Yeah, you already know. It's Onix. Onix is genuinely maybe the most underwhelming Pokemon ever made. It is the first major boss Pokemon you fight in the game. It is absolutely massive. It's a titan of strength in the anime. It strikes fear into your heart until you realize that Game Freak gave Little Bro the worst stats of all time. And not just that, maybe the worst stats in conjunction with the worst typing. Rock Ground makes him double weak to Water and Grass, two of Kanto's most common types, but also two types that always hit on the special side in the first two sets of Kanto games, leaving Onix to rely on its pitiful base 45 special defense rather than its impressive 160 physical defense. I wanted to say, well, at least Onix gets the most broken Gen 1 move, Wrap, like Lickitung does, except it doesn't. It just learns Bind in Gen 1, the infinitely worse version of Wrap. Basically just the same move with less accuracy. I would also like to say that it can at least take advantage of the fact that it learns Rock Slide and Earthquake, but it literally has less attack than Oddish. How are any of its moves supposed to do damage? Onix, I'm sorry, you're a cool Pokemon. You have a really cool evolution that is sadly not usable in any of the Kanto games. But man, you're just not cutting it. You are not making anybody's Gen 1 team. And with that, those are the Pokemon that I believe to be the absolute worst within the region of Kanto. Are there any that you agree with, disagree with? Let me know in the comment section down below. But don't forget to leave a like on this video if you enjoyed, subscribe for more videos just like this one, and I'll see you guys next time. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, strap in, because this might be the hardest video I've ever had to make. Generation 2 introduced 101 of some of the worst Pokemon known to the world. And somehow, I have to whittle that number down to just the 10 worst Johto Pokemon. And just like before, I'll mostly be considering their main story viability in the Johto region, but if a Pokemon has a competitive history, I may give it some bonus points. Number 10, Misdreavus. Honestly, Misdreavus is a fine Pokemon, especially now that it evolves into Mismagius. But the problem with Misdreavus, like many Johto Pokemon, is its location. Misdreavus is kind of like a luxurious mansion that's located in the middle of a war zone. Okay, that might be overselling it a bit. Misdreavus is like a haunted mansion from the 1700s being located in a war zone. Being only found in the Mount Silver Cave in Gen 2, it ties with Larvitar as the latest possible catch in the game. And at least Larvitar can be trained to become one of the strongest Pokemon in the game. In Gen 2, Misdreavus is just like, yay, finally, a ghost type! The same issues could be said for Murkrow, who is like a counterpart to Misdreavus, especially since it too can only be found in the post-game, but Murkrow at least gets a relatively early Pokewalker location in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, so if you preserve this incredibly niche artifact from 2010, first of all, sell it, they're like really valuable right now, or you could feasibly use a Murkrow for your Johto adventure. But Misdreavus gets no such treatment. Yes, it does get moved to the Johto Safari Zone in the remakes, but the Dusk Stone is oddly gated from you until the post-game, making this change relatively meaningless. It's so weird. Why is Heart Gold and Soul Silver completely fine with giving us stuff like Yanmega and Mamoswine in the main story, but anything that evolves with an item is treated like a taboo? At the end of the day, even if you do pick up Misdreavus at the Safari Zone, you're still stuck with a bad ghost type that only offers one winning matchup against Will in the league. But then again, Murkrow just does that, but better. It's also worth noting that in recent gens, Murkrow has a surprisingly stacked VGC resume on its side, which is why he gets to dodge this list while Misdreavus suffers. Number 9, Sneasel. A great Pokemon in the modern day, made even better by Weavile. So why is it here? Simple, it is probably the most screwed over Pokemon in the Johto region. It's a Pokemon built to be a glass cannon physical attacker, but unfortunately in Gen 2, both of its types, Ice and Dark, are exclusively special, forcing Sneasel to piece together a moveset of very underwhelming non-stab moves. Like Misdreavus, it is only found at Mount Silver in Gen 2 at the very end of the game, and while Crystal moves it forward to the Ice Path where it always should have been, the game's mechanics still make it a relatively useless Pokemon. And then, Sneasel gets screwed over again in the remakes, as Heart Gold and Soul Silver move it back to Mount Silver without any opportunity to get it early via the Pokewalker or the Safari Zone. For a remake that improves almost everything about the original Johto, this has to be the most bafflingly stupid decision in the entire game. Simply put, Sneasel has no reason to ever be used in a Johto game, and while Weavile is absolutely fantastic, it literally can't help here since Sneasel isn't even able to evolve until the Battle Frontier opens up. Number 8, Corsola. Every generation has at least one water type that just can't seem to keep up with the crowd, and that's exactly what Corsola is to Gen 2. Corsola is meant to function as, well, a really delicate tank. Two words that really shouldn't go together. as its rock typing pretty much erases any benefit that its somewhat okay defenses were giving it. And since Corsola isn't available until getting the good rod in Olivine City, it's far too late to the party to be sponging any hits with those stats anyway. Look, I like Corsola. It's a cute, charming design, but it's just that, a flavor Pokemon, and nothing more. A rare encounter to help make the gotta catch 'em all process just a little more tedious. There's a reason this Pokemon gets jumped by Marini in Alola and wiped out by climate change in Galar. It is simply not built for this world. Number 7, Shuckle. Look, I'm gonna be honest, the only reason why Shuckle isn't lower on this list is because it can at least tank some hits during a Nuzlocke while you heal up the team. It's a great sacrifice Pokemon if you need one. Oh, and there's that whole thing about how Shuckle can do the most damage of any Pokemon with a whole bunch of shenanigans. Yeah, I knew somebody was gonna bring that up in the comments in defense of Shuckle. Bro, you know nobody is letting you do this in a real match, right? I'm convinced that Game Freak made Shuckle for no reason other than it funny. In recent gens, it has at least made a name for itself in the lower tiers of competitive play as a decent stealth rock and sticky web setting lead, but that's pretty much the only area where you'll see Shuckle succeeding in life. As a main story Pokemon, there are few worse than this one. Number 6, Magcargo. Similar to Misdreavus, Murkrow, Sneasel, and Houndour, in Gen 2, Magcargo's pre-evolved form Slugma can only be found in the postgame, which is unfortunately late. Luckily, Heart Gold and Soul Silver did add a method to get Slugma early, as it can be obtained as an egg in Violet City just by answering Primo's questions correctly. And if you didn't choose Cyndaquil, this is the only Fire-type Pokemon you'll have for quite a while, which matters a lot in Johto's early game, which is filled with Grass and Bug-type Pokemon. Unfortunately, Slugma doesn't stay useful for long though, as it's incredibly slow and frail. A deadly combination that makes this Pokemon borderline unusable for Nuzlocks. He ain't even good at jumping on the grenade like Shuckle is. Give me a break! And it evolves extremely late to level 38, which is like the retirement age in Johto. The league starts at 40. And after evolving, it gains the Rock typing, just giving this unfortunately slow Pokemon even more glaring weaknesses. Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying the video, definitely consider subscribing, especially since this is a series. We still have 7 more regions left to do, so don't miss out. It's free. Number 5, Ariados. Ariados is a super slow, super frail Pokemon with many weaknesses. Based on that alone, it would qualify as one of the worst Pokemon in any region. But what makes Ariados so much worse is how it is absolutely no help with any Johto Gym or Elite Four. Bug and Poison beat a collective 0 trainers from this region. The best usage you can get out of Ariados is that it learns Shadow Sneak at level 19 in the remakes, so if you need the Cheese Morty, you can maybe do that. It's only ever been useful in the absolute depths of competitive hell. Like, sure, he's mildly useful in Gen 3 NU, but like I said about Lickitung in the Kanto video, if you're digging that far down, you've dug too far. Fact of the matter is that Ariados is one of the most outclassed Pokemon by modern day competitive standards, and it is next to useless in a Johto playthrough. It even evolves way too late. Having to use Spinarak until level 22 is just the nail in the coffin. If it maybe evolved around 15, it could feasibly be decent in the early game, but it's just not. Number 4, Sunflora. It's no secret that the Johto region is more aggressive towards grass than Antarctica. Heck, most of the reason why Meganium has as bad of a rap as it does is because of how stacked this region's boss battles are against grass types. But among all of Johto's underwhelming grass types, Blossom, Jumpluff, Meganium, none even come close to being as bad as Sunflora. For starters, Sunflora's stats are as horribly balanced as it gets for a grass type with tons of weaknesses. Its abilities are next to useless. They seriously gave this thing chlorophyll with only 30 base speed. Who was working at the office that night? It literally only learns normal and grass type moves by leveling up. It also evolves from Sunkern, the former weakest Pokemon ever by base stat total before Wishiwashi came along. And the only way to evolve it relatively early is to win the bug catching contest, which bug catcher Benny somehow always wins with his stupid Caterpie. Tell me this contest isn't rigged. Sports betting has tainted everything. But if I haven't convinced you yet, just remember that Sunflora loses to Morty, loses to Jasmine, loses to Price, loses to Claire, loses to Will, loses to Koga, loses to Karen, loses all the money in your pocket, and definitely loses to Lance. Number 3, Delibird. Ah yes, as one of Pokemon's original gimmick Pokemon, Delibird is truly one of a kind. In all the Johto-based games, Delibird only learns Present by leveling up. A move that can only be described as frustrating at best. They have given it Drill Peck as well since Gen 6, but at that point the gimmick is done. Just give this man a proper learn set. But even if you do go out of your way to waste your TMs on Delibird, its horrendous stats ensure that you won't be getting anywhere fast. The only reason why Delibird ranks 3rd on this list is, first of all, yes, Johto is just that bad. But also, if you want to burn your Icy Wind or Blizzard TM on Delibird to help with Claire because you're stuck with it as your Nuzlocke encounter, it could maybe do something in that fight. Maybe. I'm not guaranteeing anything. I wouldn't know because even when I have been stuck with Delibird and a Nuzlocke, I haven't had the guts to use it. Number 2, Ledian. Do you know how much of an accomplishment it is to outrank Delibird? Like, it shouldn't be possible, yet somehow this average, ordinary, non-gimmick Pokemon somehow did it. They said, hey, let's take this Route 2 bug type, give it an evolution that happens way too late to be remotely useful, give it the move pool of an offensive physical attacker, and give it absolutely nothing in any stat except special defense. Because we all know how great bug types are at being walls. Iron Fist as a hidden ability feels like throwing a penny to a homeless person. Like, yes, technically he's better off than he was 5 minutes ago, but functionally, nothing has changed. Ledian also somehow has an even worse matchup spread against Johto's type specialist than Sunflora does. Because Sunflora at least beats Chuck's Poliwrath. It gets its 5 minutes of fame, Ledian can't even get 5 seconds. This is genuinely maybe the worst non-gimmick Pokemon ever made. I say maybe because Gen 3 is coming, you'll see. And just like before, here are some dishonorable mentions before we reach number 1. First up, Aipom. Yes, I know. Aipom does have Ambipom in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, a much needed upgrade to a pretty bad Pokemon. But it can't be overstated how genuinely obsolete Aipom is in Gen 2, simply because Furret exists. Furret has equal or better stats than Aipom in every department. Furret learns way more moves than Aipom, and is available earlier in the game than Aipom since you can't get access to Headbutt until Ilex Forest after your Sentret should have evolved. Again, Ambipom is the only reason Aipom doesn't make the list, since it's one of the few Gen 4 evolutions allowed in Johto. Isn't it weird that Dunsparce hasn't been mentioned at all yet? Yes, Dunsparce was one of the biggest memes in Pokemon history until the Dunsparce came along, who is, well, still kind of a meme. But truth be told, Dunsparce is far from the worst Johto Pokemon to pick up and use. Between Serengrace, Body Slam, Headbutt, and Bite with a relatively respectable HP stat, it's like great value Jirachi or Togekiss. It's not the worst Pokemon to get stuck with in Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Tyrogue, and honestly all of its evolutions deserve a mention too. Tyrogue can't be obtained until after you've gotten Waterfall and the 8th Gym Badge, as you have to backtrack through Mount Mortar to get one. It's level 10 and will require 30 levels of grinding just to be usable in late Johto. Good luck. And for your troubles, you get to lose against Will, Koga, and Lance. And do sorta kinda okay against Karen, who really doesn't even use that many dark types. It is so much effort for such a mid Pokemon, regardless of the evolution. But hey, it is usable, which is a lot more than I can say about many Johto Pokemon. We also have to mention Smeargle here. With its gimmick being that it copies whatever move it last saw, Smeargle is one of the most unusable gimmick Pokemon in the main story, but what saves Smeargle from the list is how much more broken this gimmick is in competitive play, where you can basically give Smeargle all the meta's best moves. It may not be practical for the main story, but this Pokemon is undeniably successful and competitive. So of course, the number 1 worst Pokemon from the Johto region, once again, there's really no suspense to this, it's Unknown. Sporting only one single attack, Unknown is the literal definition of a gimmick Pokemon. A Pokemon meant to bring mystery and intrigue to the game, but not be functional in battle in any way, shape, or form. Although, it does have 28 forms if you feel like wasting your time catching them all. That's it, I literally can't even say anything else about Unknown. I would love to give some big analysis like I did for Sunflora and Ariados, but like, I literally can't, it doesn't do anything. Like, sure bro, you got Levitate, you can dodge an Earthquake. Whoop-de-doo, look at you. Anyway, that's gonna wrap things up for this video. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the Hoenn video whenever it drops, leave a like, and I'll see you guys next time. Okay, good news everybody, Johto is behind us, so it's only uphill from here. Or downhill? I've never understood this expression because it's harder to go uphill, but it sounds more positive. Huh. Anyway, good morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR, and these are the worst Gen 3 Pokemon to use in the Hoenn region. Number 10, Slacking. Honestly, this was single-handedly the hardest Pokemon to rank. I wasn't sure if I should go high, low, dishonorable mention, or not even make the list at all. But ultimately, I decided that Slacking should lead this video off, because while it has stats that could rival the legendary Groudon or Kyogre, Slacking is one of the least reliable Pokemon of all time thanks to its ability Truant, which only allows it to move every other turn. He's like your college roommate, bursts of motivation but probably just loafing around most of the time. Or maybe he was you in college. One or the other. This pretty much only makes slacking viable in certain VGC formats where you can use a teammate's ability like Cofagrigus' Mummy or Weezing's neutralizing gas to erase this horrid ability. But even then, I think most people would rather use that strategy with Regigigas than slacking. But refocusing on the region of Hoenn itself, this does mean if you want a slacking for a playthrough, first you'll have to endure an even harder challenge, using Slack Off until level 18. Assuming you still have your sanity after that, you are blessed with Vigoroth, who is a remarkably good main story Pokemon for a while until you turn back into slacking. Heck, Vigoroth at times has even been ranked above slacking in competitive battling. It's one thing if you're like Dusknoir getting outclassed by Dusclops because of Eviolite, but Vigoroth is just straight up better. It's kind of embarrassing. Number 9, Castform. Despite being a gimmick Pokemon, Castform is actually a substantial improvement from the gimmick Pokemon we saw in Gen 2. Now, yes, its stats are still laughably poor with base 70 across the board, essentially making this guy die at Glalie, but Castform's strength lies in its incredible move pool. Flamethrower, Ice Beam, Thunderbolt, Hydro Pump, Energy Ball, Solar Beam. As long as you're willing to shill out the money for TMs, Castform has a use. I actually used one for my last Emerald Nuzlocke, and he was the last man standing when I went into the Hall of Fame. Plus, his gimmick where he can change his type on the fly by changing the weather is situationally useful. He's like a really bad terrestrialized Pokemon. But stats aside, this Pokemon is actually not too bad. It's unfortunately just a jack of all trades, master of none. There are Pokemon who cover each of its individual niches far better, but hey, his Pillsbury Doughboy looking butt is pretty cute. Number 8, Grumpig. I'll be honest, being a Psychic type in Hoenn is rough. And no, it's not just because all of them are outclassed by Gardevoir. It's more the fact that after Brawly's gym, Psychic types literally don't beat anybody aside from a few of the Magma or Aqua Grunts who are stuck using Golbat. And guess what? You find Spoink after Brawly's gym, so it doesn't even get to reap the benefits of the one gym Psychic beats in Hoenn. Yes, even though Grumpig on paper looks a lot better than Castform or some of the dishonorable mentions you'll see later in this video, in practice, Grumpig is one of Hoenn's most underwhelming Pokemon. It's the same speed as Gardevoir, hits less hard than Gardevoir, is found much later in the game than Gardevoir, and honestly, it's even about just as bulky as Gardevoir. Pretty much the only coverage move it learns that Gardevoir doesn't is Bounce, but are we really choosing this pig over Gardevoir for a move it learns at level 60 with only base 45 attack? Yeah, try again. Grumpig ain't even cute like Spoink. I feel like most of the time Spoink just exists in its own vacuum separate from Grumpig. Because let's be honest, that's the only one most people even remember. Number 7, Plusle and Minun. Yeah, I might be cheating by doing a 2-for-1 here, but honestly these Pokemon are similar enough to where I can confidently group them together. Let's just rip the band-aid off here. These are the worst Pika clones, and it's not even close. Pachyrisu's a world champion, and all the others at least have some secondary typing that makes them somewhat decent. Plusle and Minun are built around a double battle gimmick that barely functions. Those being that their abilities of plus and minus that power up when they're on the field at the same time. This means Plusle and Minun only ever reach average strength during a select few double battles throughout the game. And it means you have to waste 2 of your 16 slots with gimmick Pokemon. Yes, Hoenn does feature more double battles than any other region, especially in Emerald, but single battles are still the norm 90% of the time. Just pick up a Manectric and call it a day. Sure, it's not as cute or cuddly as Plusle and Minun, but it at least can do some significant damage on its own. Number 6, Tropius. Winning the award for the most underwhelming Pokemon ever, Tropius is an insanely cool Pokemon held back by the worst typing and stat synergy you've ever seen. It's a slow, quote-unquote, defensive grass flying type. That's about as contradictory as vegan meatballs or gluten-free bread. It's just not meant to work like that. And on top of that, its 3D model just looks dumb and Oras, so they even sapped away all the cool factor its sprite used to have. Tropius doesn't even really beat any of the late game gyms, despite what the matchup chart says. Lazza and Tate are strapped with rock and fire type moves that take it out, and Wallace carries Ice Beam on his Ace Milotic. Sure, he takes down Wallace's Whiscash pretty easily, but you know who else does that?
Any other good grass type in Hoenn that isn't Tropius!
He's not even really useful for Hoenn's big oceans, as 99% of the trainers just use Tentacruel and Pelipper. And for the League, forget about it. He's a sacrifice mon if anything, and not even a good one at that. I know it sounds like I'm hating, but I genuinely love Tropius. I have been lobbying for an evolution or mega evolution for at least a decade now, and every generation I just become more and more disappointed in this thing. Hey, Hey, real quick, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next video on the Sinnoh region. I would really appreciate it. Number 5. Illumise. Yes, this time I am able to separate the twins. While Plusle and Minun are pretty much equally bad, Volbeat I can at least say is somewhat better than Illumise. That's not saying a lot though, Volbeat could have still very easily made this top 10 list on his own. But ultimately, just having access to Tail Glow at level 21 in the Hoenn-based games is enough to make him somewhat strong enough for a main playthrough. I wouldn't recommend it though, because as I pointed out in my worst type series from 2020, Bug is most definitely the worst type to use in the region of Hoenn. Anyway, refocusing on Illumise, even just ignoring the fact that bugs are awful in this region, Illumise offers no redeeming qualities. Yes, it is a surprisingly decent TM learn set, but with its pitiful base 73 special attack, those TMs are much better served being used on other Pokemon. Especially in Gen 3 where they only break after one usage. I did think to myself, well, it could at least boost itself with Prankster Quiver Dance, that sounds pretty good, and then I realized, wait, where's Quiver Dance? You're telling me that Volbeat got Tail Glow, one of the best stat boosting moves in the game, and they couldn't even spare Quiver Dance on Illumise? I mean, that's just downright diabolical. Evil, even. Also, is it just me, or do these guys look like beta Pokemon who accidentally made it into the final game? I don't know. There's just something about them that looks very un-Pokemon-like to me. It has nothing to do with their placement on this list, but dang, I do just think they kind of stick out in a bad way. Number 4, Chimecho. Yes, they somehow took Grumpig, who was already a downgrade of Gardevoir, and downgraded it even further to Chimecho. Chimecho feels more like a Gen 2 Pokemon in the vein that it's one of those Pokemon that just exist to be rare and nothing else. It would have had an interesting niche if it was the only Pokemon that could learn Heal Bell or Wish, but since Game Freak immediately said no to that idea, Chimecho is truly a nicheless Pokemon. Chimecho probably has one of the worst level up movesets in all of Gen 3, and in Oras, it's not much better. Oh boy, he gets Synchronoise now! Surely that's going to help! But yeah, other than that, everything I said about Grumpig also applies here. It's somehow even worse than Grumpig stat-wise, gets even less useful moves, appears even later into the game, and on top of that, it's just obnoxious to find. Only appearing 2% of the time on Mount Pyre Summit in Gen 3. So you're pretty much just wasting a ton of time for a Dex entry, and nothing more. Number 3, Delcatty. Okay, let's get Delcatty's positives out of the way. Skitty doesn't really learn any good moves in Gen 3, so you can just evolve it right away with a Moonstone and have a Pokemon with somewhat decent stats for that point in the game. I mean, it'll stop being useful around the time you reach Watson, but at least you get 2 good routes out of it. But even this can't be said about an Oras, because if you use a Moonstone early, you do miss out on Play Rough, one of its best attacks. Also, I'm not even sure if Delcatty's Gen 3 redeeming factor is even that redeeming, since the only way to make Skitty's encounter rate higher than 1% is to get to the post-game so it can become a daily swarm encounter. They also have one of the worst signature abilities in Normalize, an ability that grants extra power to all of Delcatty's non-normal type attacks, but strips away any coverage this Pokemon gets. You know, one of the few things normal types actually do really well now? No, in actuality, Skitty and Delcatty's only real redeeming factor is that they are pretty good at winning the cuteness contest since they come with all the moves you need. So, I guess May capturing one in the anime to use in contests was actually pretty accurate. Wait, is this just another poorly aged gimmick Pokemon in disguise? I give up. Number 2, Spinda. As a normal type with base 60 stats across the board, Spinda is somehow an even more underwhelming version of Castform. Even its gimmick offers nothing in terms of usability. Castform can at least change its own type to fight foes it couldn't before, but Spinda's gimmick is purely cosmetic. Even as a gimmick, it feels random. Plusle, Minun, Castform, and Shedinja are all gimmick Pokemon that at least showcase some new Gen 3 features like double battles, changing forms, and abilities. But Spinda really showcases nothing new to the series. Random generation has always been a thing. I mean, sure, if you catch a shiny, it's likely the only one to ever exist, so that's cool, I suppose. But focusing purely on Spinda's usability, it offers absolutely nothing in terms of a main story playthrough. In fact, the only time Spinda has ever been remotely usable was in Generation 5, where the Dream World gifted it with the ability of Contrary and Superpower, which essentially gives it a bulk up boost every time it uses the move. Unfortunately, Game Freak, for whatever reason, immediately took away its ability to learn Superpower in Black 2 and White 2. And now, as of Gen 8, you can't even get Superpower Spinda anymore by transferring. Now Contrary just feels like a useless ability on a useless Pokemon. I mean, I guess you could use Power Up Punch and watch its attack go down. That's sort of funny, I guess. But yeah, I don't think it even learns a single move that benefits from Contrary now, which is really sad. And just like usual, it's time for the dishonorable mentions. First up is Nosepass, who kinda parallels Apom from the Johto video. It's a pretty horrendously outclassed rock type who's only notable for its rarity, but due to the fact that you can get Probopass in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire and just how good steel types are in general, I could not confidently place Nosepass on this list. And according to the internet, you can actually evolve Nosepass as soon as you get Surf. You don't even need all 8 badges to unlock the lower floors of New Mauville, so that's pretty neat. If this was just Gen 3 Hoenn though, it certainly would have made it. Next up we have Pelipper, who I'm including purely because of how outclassed it is just in the context of the Hoenn-based games. Pelipper did not receive its new ability Drizzle until Gen 7, which is pretty much the only reason Pelipper is a good Pokemon today. Obviously, this is also why Pelipper did not make the top 10, I just had to clarify why. Next up, we have Sableye, who sort of loosely used to be a gimmick Pokemon due to being the first Pokemon with no weaknesses, at least before fairies were introduced. But now that fairies do exist, Sableye is just a really bad regular Pokemon with awful stats. However, it does have a Mega Evolution, and was mildly useful in Gen 5 competitive when it gained the Prankster ability. So for those reasons, Sableye narrowly avoids cracking the top 10. And lastly, our final dynamic duo of Hoenn, Solrock and Lunatone. They're pretty underwhelming Pokemon, but if you're just using them for a main story playthrough, they're not the worst. Their stats aren't amazing, but definitely usable, and they actually both get a decent number of powerful attacks by leveling up. At number 1, Luvdisc. Luvdisc absolutely takes the cake for the fully evolved Pokemon with the worst stats ever conceived. Still kinda salty that Alomomola wasn't an evolution, but whatever. What's most impressive about Luvdisc is that by definition, it's really not even a gimmick Pokemon. It doesn't have something intentionally holding it back, like Shedinja's 1 HP, or Delibird only learning Present, or Unknown only learning Hidden Power. No, Luvdisc is actually a Pokemon that was designed to be as normal as any other. Except, it just sucks. I mean, sure, you could argue it only exists for heart scales to exist, something that has even gone out of style as of Gen 8, since you can just relearn moves on the fly now. Speed is its only above average stat, which it can further contribute to with its ability Swift Swim, but who really cares about speed when you hit with the force of a mosquito smashing into a car windshield? The coolest part of all though is that Luvdisc is a super late game Pokemon. I mean, not that it really even matters, even if Luvdisc was a Route 1 Pokemon, it would still be terrible. But the fact that you get this thing just before the Pokemon League just feels like insult to injury. Yes, Luvdisc is the generational kind of terrible that we only see once every... well, I was going to say every generation, but probably not even that. But that'll do it for the Hoenn region's worst Pokemon. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next videos in the series, and I'll see you guys next time. With 3 regions down, our next stop on the worst Pokemon tour is none other than Sinnoh. The land of too many HMs, not enough fire types, and a surprising number of pretty bad Pokemon. So good morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR, and these are the worst Pokemon in the Sinnoh region. Right off the bat, I'm immediately conflicted on who the worst early game normal type in the Sinnoh region should be, because Bibarel and Lopunny are having the mid-off of a lifetime right over there. Lopunny has slightly better stats than Bibarel, that's for sure, but Bibarel's 3 abilities are surprisingly broken for a relatively useless beaver. One of these is Simple, which doubles this Pokemon's stat changes. So when Bidoof or Bibarel use Defense Curl, they get +2 defense instead of +1. The most broken move that Bibarel can use with this is Curse, which would double both its attack and defense stats, but much like your average Christian dad, Bibarel doesn't learn Curse until he's in his 50s. So that point is sadly pretty irrelevant. However, in Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, Bibarel can use Sword Stance to get +4 attack and then rip off some nasty quick attacks and Aqua Jets, so that's something at least. Meanwhile, Lopunny has 2 pretty awful abilities, with Klutz in particular being one of the worst in the entire game. Furthermore, Lopunny is a friendship evolution, which means it's going to take significantly longer to evolve than Bibarel, who just evolves at level 15. Also, Baneri is very cruelly the only Pokemon to evolve this way that starts with 0 friendship instead of the usual base 70. Evolving this thing is sadly going to be a lot harder than a simple walk in the park. And honestly, since Bibarel is so much more accessible, and not to mention can also access basically every relevant HM in Sinnoh, I actually think Bibarel is a lot better than Lopunny within the region of Sinnoh itself. Yes, Lopunny has a Mega Evolution, but Megas didn't come back for the remakes, so it's never been usable in any Sinnoh game ever. Lopunny does have a lot more tools that admittedly make it work better in a competitive environment than Bibarel does, but I judge main story viability above all else in these videos. Which means, good news to all Bibarel fans, your boy gets to walk out of here scot-free. Number 9, Carnivine. Carnivine sticks out as one of the few Sinnoh Pokemon with really nothing significant about it. It doesn't evolve, it's a mono grass type, it doesn't have a neat signature move or ability, it truly feels like a filler Pokemon for the most part. Even none of its stats other than attack manage to break 100. It's just an underwhelming Pokemon from every angle. With that being said, there's a reason why Carnivine is only number 9 on this list. It does show up at a decent point in the story, being catchable right before fighting Crash or Wake. And assuming you're not using the infinitely better grass types of Roserade or Torterra, it could be a good last-minute Nuzlocke catch for the gym fight. Well, if you have TMs at least. In BDSP, Carnivine at least gets access to Grass Knot and Leaf Tornado when you need it most. But in the original Gen 4 games, Carnivine was stuck with Vine Whip as its only attacking grass moves until level 47 when it finally learned Power Whip. Yeah, if this was just Gen 4 Carnivine I was ranking, he'd be way higher up on the list. Because unfortunately, the fact of the matter is, Carnivine is really only helping you for Wake. After this battle, he doesn't beat another significant trainer for the rest of the game, aside from Bertha and the Elite Four. But if you don't have a better grass or water type by then, something has gone horribly wrong. And speaking of which, number 8, Lumineon. The only real redeeming factor behind Lumineon is that it's at least a water type. Perhaps the worst water type in Sinnoh, but a water type nonetheless. Which means it can assist with the many Steelix in Byron's gym and matches up decently well against the Sinnoh League, most notably against Bertha and Flint. It does have Swift Swim, which means you can teach it Rain Dance to make it a somewhat okay Rain Sweeper, even if it is outclassed by virtually every other Swift Swim user in the Sinnoh region, including Floatzel, who's been available from the literal start of the game. But hey, say if you're Nuzlocking and you've lost literally every other water type in existence, Lumineon is not the worst contingency plan. It's just a really, really bad one. Number 7, Phione. Yes, this actually is a Pokemon that you can use during the main story, if you're willing to put an astronomical amount of work in. In Gen 4, it just requires transferring the Manaphy egg over and then trading in a Ditto to breed with it, or by receiving the Manaphy egg that was available during Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl's launch. But the question is, why would you want to? It's already more work than it's worth just to get Phione, and Phione is literally just a worse version of Manaphy. From a purely this Pokemon sucks compared to another Pokemon aspect, you could argue that Phione deserves to be number 1 on this list because of Manaphy. But I do acknowledge that Phione is at least somewhat better than the Pokemon below it. Still not as good as Lumineon though. It doesn't even have Swift Swim like Lumineon does, and at least Lumineon levels up really fast, as it's one of the few Pokemon to be a part of the Erratic EXP group. Meanwhile, since Phione is just this weird pseudo-mythical thingamabobber, it levels up horrendously slowly. It's not going to keep pace no matter how hard you try. Number 6, Cherrim. If Phione was a worse version of Lumineon, then Cherrim is most certainly a worse version of Carnivine. Let's start with its pre-evolved form, Cherubi. Cherubi is already one of the hardest Pokemon to find in Sinnoh, due to the fact that it exclusively appears as one of those obnoxiously rare Honey Tree encounters. It's not as rare as Munchlax or anything, but still annoying. And unlike Carnivine, who is at least fully evolved by the time you find it, you have to struggle to use one of the worst Pokemon in existence all the way until it finally evolves at level 25. Did I mention that in Gen 4, Cherubi doesn't even learn a single Grass-type move until level 19? Haha, good luck! Not that it really matters though, because there is literally no benefit to owning a Grass type at this point in the game. Cherubi already misses out on Roark, who is fought before you get access to Honey Trees. It's no help against Gardenia or Maylene. It's pretty much just eating up a slot on your team until you reach Crash or Wake, which again, at that point, just catch a Carnivine if you're in that much trouble. Anyway, when Cherubi does finally evolve into Cherrim, it becomes, you guessed it, another very bad gimmick Pokemon. Yay! I was just thinking that we were missing something from this video. Cherrim's gimmick is that it transforms in strong sunlight, while at the same time activating its signature ability Flower Gift, which raises its attack and special defense to rather random stats by 50%. This buff was virtually meaningless in Gen 4, as the only physical move it could naturally learn was Takedown. In BDSP, they at least give it the decently powerful physical move of Petal Blizzard, but not until level 41. But on that note, BDSP also took away Cherrim's ability to learn Play Rough from Sword and Shield, so it still lacks any substantial coverage. And this is all while considering that Grass still ain't even that good in Sinnoh. Hi, if you're enjoying the video so far, then be sure to subscribe. We still have 5 regions left to go, so don't miss out. Number 5, Bastiodon. Long before Zacian and Zamazenta's battle of the Sword and Shield, we had Rampardos and Bastiodon, who gave us a far less interesting version of this matchup. Yes, I'm aware that the Bastiodon Mafia exists and they somehow managed to make this Pokemon match up against certain legendaries really well in the Scarlet and Violet VGC meta. But yeah, I've said it before and I'll say it again, purely defensive Pokemon are sadly not built for main story playthroughs. The war of attrition is a hard one for them to win. Now take that logic and apply it to Bastiodon, a Pokemon with absolutely horrid defensive typing, as Rock strips away most of the benefits that Steel would have provided. Not to mention that a much better Pokemon with this same typing is also present in this region. Well, at least in the one Sinnoh game that actually matters. As Probopass can actually be obtained as early as level 15 in Platinum by catching and immediately evolving a Nosepass in Mount Coronet on the Eternity side of the mountain. Man, 2 regions in a row where Probopass has been an oddly convenient Pokemon to use. Who would have thought? But sadly, that just makes Bastiodon's stock value look like Hawktua coin, who has to wait until level 30 to reach its final form. From there, Bastiodon is only somewhat useful in Candace's gym. I say somewhat because there's an odd amount of fighting type Pokemon there, so even that isn't as easy as you would think. And like, maybe he beats a few Pokemon on Aaron's team in the Elite Four. The problem is, I can't even say he confidently wins that either, because what is he dealing damage with? Not Body Press, he didn't get that until Gen 9. And without that move, he can't really do anything. On that note, without TMs, this Pokemon is absolutely cooked in Sinnoh. It only has Ancient Power until level 51 when it finally gets its only other stab move, Iron Head. So unless you enjoy making Sinnoh's battles even slower than they already are, you should definitely steer clear of Bastiodon. Number 4, Purugly. Oh yeah, remember Lopunny and Bibarel from the beginning of this video? Man, they feel so much better compared to what we're getting into now. Ignoring the fact that Glameow and Purugly are only usable in Pearl and Shining Pearl, let's focus on how annoying it is just to use these Pokemon. Despite having stats that look like they came straight from Route 201, Glameow isn't even catchable until just before the 6th gym. It's like teaching your kid how to do addition and subtraction before they go off to high school. So yippee, you caught yourself a level 30 Glameow. Why? I don't know. It's not like it beats anything significant at this point in the game. But at least it should evolve right away, right? Haha, wrong again, Buster. For whatever reason, Glameow doesn't evolve until level 38. Is this a Gen 5 Pokemon in disguise? And then, and only then, do you get Purugly, who has somewhat acceptable stats. I'm sorry, and Mars gets to use one of these things at level 16? No wonder that boss fight was so hard. Purugly is a Pokemon you're meant to get at level 20, not level 38. You'd be better off suffering through Baneri's obnoxious friendship evolution. At least if you run a marathon across the Sinnoh region, you might get it somewhat early. Even comparing it strictly to Lopunny without the evolution nonsense, Lopunny gets so much better coverage and has much better bulk for only a few less points in attack and speed. The nicest thing I can say about Purugly is that in BDSP, with the heart scale, you can teach it Play Rough. So, funnily enough, it's actually kind of a good counter for Cynthia's Garchomp as one of the only Pokemon in the game that outspeeds it. But that's it, you're literally carrying a useless Pokemon around for 10 plus hours just to fight one Pokemon. And even then, Abomasnow with Ice Shard accomplishes the same thing with less tedium. Number 3, Chatot. Chatot is yet another Pokemon who really only exists as a gimmick to tie into the Nintendo DS's microphone. You wanna know how I know that? Because this Pokemon is only available right before Volkner's gym, where he loses! Does that sound like a Pokemon that was designed with love and care and attention? No, it sounds like a Pokemon that was made because Nintendo told them to. In fact, the only reason I can confidently say that Chatot is not in the top 2 is because BDSP added a trade in Eternity where you can get Chatot pretty early. And honestly, as an early game Pokemon, it's actually not terrible. It's got 91 speed and 92 special attack. Heck, that's enough to beat Gardenia and Maylene. Not too bad, honestly. And if you're playing competitively, you can teach Chatot Boom Burst, which may be only one good move, but it's one good move that none of these other Pokemon have. But I do have to balance across all games, and seeing as how Chatot is only situationally useful in 2 out of the 5 Sinnoh-based games, and even then, only for a little while, I can't say it's any better than this. The moment Staraptor is available, Chatot is getting dumped off the team, assuming you even knew that you could get him that early in BDSP. But at least I can say, the spirit of Chiding saved Chatot from being any higher. Thank you for in-game trades. Number 2, Wormadam. My editor told me I should just leave it at that, but I actually do want to elaborate on this one. You would think a Pokemon with 3 different variants would have at least one that's somewhat useful, but sadly, that is not the case. I mean, one of them is literally called Trash Form, so that one speaks for itself. Okay, positives in Gen 4. There are none. Positives in BDSP? it learns Quiver Dance now. That's kinda good. Well, just for the grass one, honestly. It's really not that big of a benefit for the other two. And even then, Wormadam Plant Cloak doesn't learn its only good damage-dealing moves until levels 47 and 50 with Leaf Storm and Bug Buzz. So, truthfully, you're really not even benefiting from Quiver Dance for 90% of the game. And then, when you finally get your good moves, oh boy, you get thrashed by almost all the late-game trainers. And the other forms are no different. They also don't learn any useful moves until level 47. And really, that's the biggest offense that Wormadam commits over most of the other Pokemon on this list. It is just bent on doing absolutely nothing for most of the game. I mean, their brother Mothim is not much better, but he at least learns some decent attacking moves relatively soon after evolving. Mothim might be a really, really bad Quiver Dance sweeper, but at least it can say it does that. Wormadam can't do anything. They had 3 shots and airballed all 3 of them. These things somehow make Cherim look good in comparison. Now that's hard to do. And now, like always, it is time for our dishonorable mentions. The first one is rather strange. It's actually Rotom. This is technically a main story Pokemon only in Platinum. However, if you aren't replaying the game in 2009, I have bad news. His alternate forms, which are really the only reason you would use Rotom, are sadly no longer available. In fact, the only Sinnoh-based games you can now get Rotom's alternate forms is Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. But he is sadly reverted to a post-game only catch like he was in Diamond and Pearl because these remakes were faithfully terrible. However, Rotom's forms, particularly Wash, are undeniably good in competitive contexts. Next is Rampardos, who is not nearly as bad as Bastiodon, at least in a main story playthrough. Honestly, in competitive, Rampardos is probably even worse than Bastiodon. But hey, if you just want to smash stuff up and throw caution to the wind, he's not the worst main story Pokemon ever. He at least has an impeccable attack stat and high enough speed to easily defeat many of the more minor trainers in the game. And lastly is Pachirisu. But in all honesty, Pachirisu doesn't face much competition from electric types in this region. Outside of Platinum, I'm pretty sure you only have access to the Shinx and Pikachu families. So if you're Nuzlocking, there's plenty of opportunities for Pachirisu to be your standout electric type. And of course, it's a world champion. Yes, I know, I was there, literally. It doesn't mean a lot in a main story context, but it is something to consider. And now, for the number 1 worst Pokemon in the Sinnoh region. Yeah, nope, sorry, I'm not counting male Combi, that just feels like cheating. But I will count an almost equally bad bug type, Kricketune. Yeah, I know, whoop, yeah, the cry is cool. Can you tell me anything else about this Pokemon? Yeah, didn't think so. Before Gen 5 radically overhauled the idea of what a bug type could be, Kricketune is that last vestige of the stereotype that they are nothing more than terrible early game Pokemon. I'd like to say, hey, at least he evolves at level 10, that's a pretty big positive. Until you realize he doesn't beat Rourke, and by the time you reach Gardenia, he's already painfully outclassed stat-wise. Unlike virtually every other Pokemon on this list who has received some sort of a buff over time, Kricketune has gotten worse. It at least got X-Scissor kind of early in Diamond and Pearl at level 26, but even that got moved back in every subsequent game after they added Slash to its learn set, which frankly just isn't nearly as good. They also took Leech Life out of its level up moveset in the remakes because God forbid this Pokemon have one usable move early in the game. Kricketune has probably lost more good moves since Gen 4 than it has gained. And even if Kricketune stayed exactly the same as it did in Gen 4, it would still be worse due to the fact that every other Pokemon has gotten better. I can name at least one redeeming factor about every other Pokemon on this list. Bastiodon has a small niche in VGC. Perugly has really good speed. Chatot has Boom Burst. Wormadam has Quiver Dance. What does Kricketune have? Peace of mind that nobody is going to catch him? That might be the only thing. And with that, my peace of mind has been disrupted knowing the Pokemon this bad still exist 4 generations in. But hey, if you want to make it better, then be sure to like this video and subscribe for more videos just like this one. I'll see you guys next time. Next up in our worst Pokemon list, we have the Unova region. Home to the largest roster of new Pokemon in any generation, and surprisingly, despite these large numbers, honestly, none of the Pokemon in this video are nearly as bad as the ones I mentioned in previous videos. Since Game Freak made the radical decision to not include any old Pokemon in Black and White's main story, they actually did a pretty darn good job at making most of these guys decently viable. Most of them. So good morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR, and these are the worst Pokemon to use in the Unova region. Number 10, Bouffalant. This Pokemon is a classic example of how sometimes the best ability is availability. And oh boy, you definitely don't want to be a mono normal type who's only available on the last route in the game. Bouffalant's low speed of 55 means it's going to struggle against most of the late game opponents, especially Chantal and Marshall, who just have an outright type advantage on it. With that being said, Bouffalant does offer some positives, which is why it's only number 10. For starters, when you catch it, it should already have two of its best attacks, Head Smash and Mega Horn, both coming in at an impressive 120 power. Furthermore, its two main abilities are also quite good, as Reckless powers up Head Smash by another 20%, and Sap Sipper gives this Pokemon immunity to grass-type attacks. Not that many trainers at this point in the game will be using them, but Bouffalant's saving grace really comes in the form of Black 2 and White 2, where it can at least be caught on Route 9 just before challenging the 7th gym. So you'll at least get more than an hour's worth of playtime with this Pokemon in the sequels. It's still far from amazing, but with its high attack stat and incredibly wide move pool, it's at least a decently usable Pokemon and definitely takes advantage of Univa's unbreakable TMs. Number 9, Musharna. Unfortunately, the Psychic type struggles mightily in Univa. Not only do they have to deal with record numbers of good Bug, Dark, and Ghost-type Pokemon in this region, but they also offer 0 winning matchups against anybody significant aside from Marshall and Roxy. However, what Musharna does have going for it is its early game presence. Munna is available right after defeating the first gym, learns Psybeam at only level 11, a crazy strong move for that point in the game, and since it doesn't really learn any other good moves for a while, you can pop the Moonstone on it as soon as you get it from Pinwheel Forest. Then you have a Pokemon with 116 base HP and 95 special defense at only level 20. An extremely valuable tank, especially for a Nuzlocke. Unfortunately, Musharna's usefulness does start to wear off around the mid-game though. Around Elisa's gym, Musharna's stats are no longer considered all that impressive, and the growing number of Dark-type threats at this stage make sure that it'll be heading to the PC box sooner rather than later. Musharna also gets no help from the sequels, as it and its pre-evolution are post-game exclusive catches, which is a huge bummer because you don't even get to beat Roxy, which would have been a big plus for this Pokemon, maybe even enough to save it from the list. Number 8, Behem. Alright, now take everything I just said about Musharna, but take out the part where I said it's useful in the beginning. Because Behem is essentially the same thing, but its pre-evolution isn't available until just before the 6th gym in both pairs of games. On top of that, Behem evolves excruciatingly late at level 42. This Pokemon doesn't have great abilities, has poorly distributed stats at best, and a level up learn set that consists almost entirely of Psychic type moves. The only real positive is that Behem does learn Thunderbolt via TM, which can be gotten from P2 Lab right after you obtain Surf. This is really the only thing that sets it apart from Musharna, and Electric is a surprisingly valuable type in this region due to the abundance of flying types. But that's pretty much all I can say. Behem is strictly a worse version of Musharna, except in Black 2 and White 2 where you can at least catch it. Low bar, I know. But unfortunately, catching it means that you probably missed out on the infinitely better Nuzlocke encounter of Litwick in Celestial Tower, so even then, there's not much to celebrate. Number 7, Audino. Audino is probably the closest thing this region has to a gimmick Pokemon. Basically just being designed because the anime staff needed a new Pokemon to give Nurse Joy, I'm assuming. Its gimmick is that it makes you think you're gonna find something cool in the shaking grass, and then oop, it's just free EXP again. In fact, the best thing Audino has going for it is that KOing it makes you level up really fast. That, and with 103 base HP, it does have a role as a decent early game tank. It also learns Secret Power at level 20, so it at least has some way to deal damage for a little bit, until its base 60 attack and special attack becomes so bad that it's no longer usable. Which is a shame, because including TMs, Audino probably boasts the best move pool in all of Unova, which is great now that they no longer break. The problem is, much like Castform from Hoenn, Audino doesn't really have the damage output to justify using it as a high coverage offensive Pokemon. It's much better suited for playing defense. And you know what the best defensive strategy is in Pokemon? Using a freaking potion and leaving Audino in the box! But hey, say it's a hardcore Nuzlocke. If you have no good encounter to line up on a route, you can feasibly guarantee yourself an Audino and at least give yourself a decent support Pokemon. Number 6, Lilligant. Let me warn you, this is the first of many grass types in this region. The Unova region may not hate this type as much as Johto, but it's a pretty firm second place. Of the roughly 140 species you'll be fighting against in Black and White's main story, flying types make up about 11%. I shouldn't have to tell you just how much better bug types got in this gen. Poison types may not be as numerous as previous regions, but bear in mind that almost every Plasma Grunt will be carrying Trubbish or Whirlipede. And while fire and ice are still relatively rare, they are much more common than they were in past regions. On top of that, most of Unova's gyms, especially the late game ones, are very aggressive towards grass. With that being said, Lilligant on paper doesn't look that bad. 90 speed and 110 special attack seem to make it look like a good offensive Pokemon. Though the main issue is just its move pool. I don't know why, but it feels like every Gen 5 grass type is designed like a Gen 2 grass type, where they literally only learn grass type moves, and it's kind of annoying. However, move pool wise, Lilligant has two things really going for it. As a Petalil, it gets Giga Drain at level 26, and then if you immediately evolve it with a Sunstone, you'll get Quiver Dance at level 28. Yeah, don't ask me why Lilligant is one of the only stone evolutions that keeps learning moves afterward, it's weird to me too. This does mean that you missed out on Energy Ball, which Petalil doesn't get until level 35, but hey, it's Quiver Dance. I think the trade-off is worth it. It's sad to have to rank Lilligant this high though. It's a charming design, it looks like it has the stats to perform, it's just that Giga Drain and Quiver Dance are probably the only two moves you'll ever be using. And that leaves this Pokemon with big chunks of the story where it's just not really doing anything. Hey, you better not go anywhere, we got 4 more regions left to do after this one, maybe 5 whenever Gen 10 comes out, so be sure to subscribe and leave a like on this video if you're enjoying it so far. Thanks! Number 5, Maractus. Oh, grass types, you thought you were done? Nope, time for round 2. Now, I will say, when I first outlined this video, I fully expected to rank Maractus around the top 3 or 4, and, well, I was close. I guess 5th isn't much better. But honestly, I was surprised when looking at its stats. Sure, it's a bit slow and frail, but it has a pretty decent 106 special attack. On top of that, by the time you catch it, it's already close to learning Giga Drain at level 26. And then, if you feel like going gambling, who doesn't? It gets Acupressure at level 29, a move that basically doubles one of its stats at random. If you get lucky and get speed, you could actually turn Maractus into an okay Sweepermon. Unfortunately, like Lilligant, Maractus' Gen 5 move pool does leave a lot to be desired though. It does get access to some decent physical attacks like Drain Punch, Aerial Ace, and Poison Jab, but as far as special moves go, I hope you're happy with just Giga Drain. Furthermore, while Acupressure is a fun gimmick, it's not always reliable. And with Maractus being so frail, it isn't afforded many opportunities to set up. You could feasibly have fun with this Pokemon and see some okay success though. It's like Gen 5 Carnivine, situationally useful at best. Number 4, Leavanny. Triple overtime for the grass types here. Well, I do have good news, this is the only bug type represented in this list, so at least they got a lot better. Anyway, Leavanny is a very odd case of a Pokemon. If you're willing to grind friendship, it can evolve pretty early, but sorta has to take a backseat in both Berg and Elise's gyms until it can finally shine at Clay's gym. In Black 2 and White 2, its situation is even worse with Roxy added as the second gym leader. But it does learn some really powerful moves, and not too late in the game either. As a Sewaddle, it starts with Bug Bite and Razor Leaf, which both aren't bad by that point in the game, and in its 30s it gets both Leaf Blade and X-Scissor. Combine that with some TMs like Aerial Ace and Shadow Claw, and this Pokemon actually boasts some decent coverage. But obviously, Leavanny's fatal flaw is that it is a bug and grass type. Perhaps one of the game's worst type combinations, if not the worst. This means Leavanny is weak to almost every common type, and while it is faster than Maractus, it is only marginally bulkier, which is certainly offset by how many more weaknesses it has. In fact, this Pokemon's typing pretty much makes it unusable from the 6th gym all the way to the end of the game. You know, right when it finally gets those good moves I was talking about. It's only slightly better in Black 2 and White 2 where Marlin gets added and Bryson gets removed. Number 3, Liepard. Pretty much the only thing that stands out about Liepard is its prankster ability. An ability that you can't get in a main story playthrough. Well, at least now that the Dream World is dead, which means Liepard's dreams are also dead. Also, what is with these cat Pokemon? This is the 3rd region in a row where the regional cat has made the top half of the list. Now, admittedly, yes, Liepard is significantly better than the likes of Delcatty and Perugly. It actually evolves at a decent level 20, provides slightly more utility as a dark type, and has stats that actually aren't that horrible. The issue is mostly just how outclassed it is. Liepard is like if you asked ChatGPT to make a dark type. Its move pool is severely lacking in sauce, much like the other Pokemon who made this list. And sadly, dark types really don't get to shine in Unova until the League rolls around. And at that point, not only is Liepard severely outclassed stat-wise, it's also outclassed by every other dark type in the Unova region, who not only have better stats, but far better move pools. Crocodile, Bisharp, Zoroark, Scrafty. In a region full of very accessible and very powerful dark types, it just leaves the player with no real reason to ever use Liepard. Even in Black 2 and White 2, virtually every returning dark type is also far better than Liepard. It doesn't even really benefit from being an early game dark type either, as Liepard doesn't get its first decent dark type attack until level 31 with Assurance. and doesn't learn its first base 70 power dark move until level 43 with Night Slash. And by that time, every other Unova dark type is outrunning it by a country mile. Number 2, Watchog. The real biggest flaw with Watchog is that it has the shared status as the Route 1 normal type with Lillipup, who is just infinitely better. So Patrat doesn't even get one route of usefulness. Lillipup is faster, hits harder, and evolves earlier than Watchog does. Not to mention, it's also the GOAT of black and white speedruns. It's crazy how much I'm talking up Stoutland considering it's literally in the lowest tier of competitive play, but that just proves even more how bad Watchog is. The only real plus that this Pokemon provides is that Patrat gets Crunch absurdly early at level 16. Which, hey, that's a better Dark-type move than Liepard is ever going to get. But even compared to Liepard, Watchog's stats are just abysmal. And it's stuck with Illuminate and Keen Eye, two of the worst abilities in the entire game. One of which only just raises the amount of time that wild Pokemon attack you. So have fun with that. If Stoutland is the speedrunning champ, then Watchog is the speedrun to disaster. And somehow, it's still not number 1 on this list. As always, it's time for our dishonorable mentions. Emolga is first on our list, as its underwhelming stats certainly appear to make it a candidate for one of Unova's worst. However, due to its high speed and hit-and-run nature with Volt Switch, Emolga can certainly be a decently viable Pokemon. Electric is a very valuable type to have in this region, especially in Black 2 and White 2, when Marlin gets added as the 8th gym leader. Next up is Durant, who you may expect to be on this list for the same reason as Bouffalant, as it simply appears too late to be useful. But truth be told, in a Nuzlocke, Durant could actually be a great last-minute catch for the league. It resists Ghost in Gen 5, beats Grimsley pretty easily, beats Caitlyn, and can at least tank Marshall's physical hits. Most importantly though, it's one of the few Pokemon capable of outspeeding and KOing Ghetsis' Hydreigon. So you may not have Durant for a long time, but it will be a good time. On the note of late game availability, Braviary and Mandiba certainly come to mind, who, evolving at level 54, may not even be considered usable to many players in Black and White. Fortunately, Black 2 and White 2 adds an early game encounter with them on Route 4, so you get to experience using them at a way lower level than usual, which does make them significantly better. Same goes for Volcarona, who also gets this treatment in the sequels. Can you believe we've done a whole Unova-based video without saying anything bad about a monkey? But surprisingly, all 3 of the monkeys aren't horrendous main story options. Of the 3, Simisage is probably the worst just due to how bad Grass matches up against everything. But even then, Simisage gets Seed Bomb really early at level 22, and later gets Acrobatics via TM, which somewhat eases the pain of being a Grass type. Cryogonal is a Pokemon who is absolutely horrendous in competitive play, but assuming you're lucky enough to get one, it's not the worst for Black and White's endgame. Cryogonal is really fast, comes with Ice Beam right away, and beats the Dragon Gym shortly afterward. So he's definitely more useful than the 10 on this list, even if he isn't in Black 2 and White 2. And lastly, Basculin. While Basculin may be one of the most frail, fully evolved Pokemon in Unova, he does have an ace up his sleeve: Adaptability. One of the best abilities in the entire game. With it, he can fire off 80 base power Aqua Jets and 180 base power Aqua Tails. This means as long as you outspeed your opponent and they don't resist water, you should be one-hit KOing things more often than not. And number 1, Heatmor. Heatmor combines almost all the bad aspects of all the Pokemon on this list. First and foremost, it's only available on Victory Road in Black and White. You know, the literal last area of the main story. And in Black 2 and White 2, it gets the Musharna treatment, being removed from the main story entirely. There's a whole volcano area in White 2, and they still forgot to add Heatmor there. Well, let's focus solely on Black and White since the sequels aren't a factor. You may think, well, golly gee, if it's this late in the game, surely it must have good moves like Bouffalant and Durant, right? Wrong again, Eager McBeaver. Flame Burst will probably be its only usable move when you catch it, so unless you're willing to shell out 70,000 big ones to buy the Fire Blast TM, you're stuck with this as your only fire-type attack until level 51 when it finally learns Flamethrower. Not that fire coverage really makes a difference, because of all the late-game trainers, Heatmor only really assists with defeating Grimsley's Bisharp, Ends Vanillix, and Ends Klinklang. But also, fighting types do the same thing, and almost every single fighting type in Unova is really good, so please for the love of God just use one of those instead. Also, Heatmor has 2 absolutely garbage abilities, and stats that are practically begging for your opponent to put it down in one swift blow. I would say, well, just stick with Heatmor for the entire postgame and then maybe you can fight Alder with him, but no! We are not doing this! This region has so many good fire types, and you're settling for Heatmor? Please, come back to the light, my son. Your family misses you. We're worried about you. Why are you wasting hours of your life trying to make Heatmor good? Make better life choices, please! Anyway, my blood pressure is up, and I'm hot, and I'm sweaty, because there are heat more believers out of all the 156 Pokemon in Unova. I hope you're proud of yourselves. Be sure to leave a like on this video if you enjoyed, subscribe for more videos just like this one, and I'll see you guys next time. 6 generations in, we finally arrive at the region of Kalos. In case this is your first time watching my Worst Pokemon Every Region series, what are you doing here? There's a whole playlist, start from the beginning. Anyway, Kalos is a very difficult region to break down. Like Unova, most of the new Pokemon introduced here are pretty usable, even the worst ones here don't compare to the worst ones from Gens 1 through 4, and on top of that, Kalos introduced the least amount of Pokemon in one generation with only 72. So I've got my work cut out for me today. Let's break down the 10 worst Pokemon to use in the region of Kalos. Number 10, Pyroar. This is arguably the most tragic Pokemon in the entire Kalos region, and the biggest example of a stat and move pool mismatch that I have ever seen. On paper, Pyroar looks amazing. Fire-type Pokemon are always great in a main story playthrough. It has 106 speed and an incredible 109 special attack. But that's just the problem. This Pokemon learns no special moves. Aside from its 2 main stab options, Flamethrower and Hyper Voice, it doesn't really have much to work with. I guess it has Solar Beam via TM, but that pretty much guarantees that Sunny Day would have to be your 4th move. And you definitely don't want to be setting that up in front of a Rock or Water type, especially with how frail Pyroar is. Aside from that, your only other option is realistically Dark Pulse, but you can't get the TM for that until you have Waterfall, so that sucks. Also, I know this is purely a Gen 6 video, but it's worth mentioning that this is Pyroar's 4th generation existing, and Game Freak really hasn't made its move pool any better, which is a huge L. Like, come on, at least give it Scorching Sands or something. But I guess I shouldn't be surprised they did give this thing Moxie as a hidden ability, which, oh yay, maybe its base 68 physical attack will be halfway usable now. It feels like the designers just weren't on the same page when they made this Pokemon. And last but not least, I also just feel like Litleo takes way too long to evolve. Like, it's a really early game Pokemon with low stats, but it doesn't evolve until level 35. That is way too long to wait for a Pokemon this bad. The only reason Pyroar ranks at the top of this list is because it at least has pretty favorable matchups against important trainers like Viola, Ramos, Valerie, Wolfric, and Wickstrom. The Kalos region is pretty friendly to Fire-type Pokemon. Number 9, Furfrou. Furfrou is probably the closest thing that Gen 6 has to a gimmick Pokemon. Well, maybe Aegislash, but it's so good that it's really hard to call it a gimmick. But Furfrou's gimmick isn't nearly as useful. It just has a bunch of different haircut forms, which, while cute, doesn't exactly add to its viability. Admittedly, Furfrou is a fantastic early game Pokemon, which is why it's ranked higher than you might expect. Honestly, just between Headbutt and Dig, this Pokemon manages to get through the first half of the game pretty well. Unfortunately, its middle-of-the-road stats do eventually catch up with it. And aside from Wild Charge, which you can't even get until the postgame, Furfrou's physical move pool does not really widen out at all. At the very least, Furfrou's ability Fur Coat lends it some much-needed bulk. And the only gyms it will really struggle with are Grant and Karina. Everywhere else, it can at least hold its own. Will it be your go-to Pokemon? No, probably not, but it's surprisingly not horrendous for an early game normal type. Number 8, Meowstic. I really love Meowstic and have frequently used both forms of this Pokemon on my Kalos teams, but admittedly, in a region full of strong psychic types like Alakazam, Delphox, Gardevoir, and so many more, Meowstic just doesn't have the tools to stand out. It has good speed, but its 83 special attack is surprisingly low for a Pokemon built to be a special attacker. Unfortunately, this may be because Meowstic's 2 forms are working against it rather than for it. Since the male is support-oriented and the female is attack-oriented, the devs decided to give Meowstic stats that don't particularly work for either of them. I really wish the 2 forms just had entirely different stats. It also doesn't help that if you're Nuzlocking and get stuck with a male Meowstic, then you just have an infinitely worse move pool to work with. If you get the female, you at least have access to Charge Beam, Shadow Ball, and Signal Beam at decent enough levels, but the male version has to rely entirely on TMs to have a good attacking move pool. As I've said in the past, support Pokemon aren't really the best for main story playthroughs. Very rarely will you actually need to whittle down an NPC's team like you do in a competitive match. But even then, if you do get the infinitely better female version, it still doesn't compare to any of the other offensive psychic types found in Kalos' immense Pokedex. Number 7, Aromatisse. Honestly, this Pokemon's move pool almost looks like a copy and paste of Meowstic's. It gets Psychic and Fairy coverage from leveling up, and gets Energy Ball and Thunderbolt via TM. If you use both of these Pokemon on the same team, they might just end up with the exact same movesets, despite having completely different types. But here's what makes Aromatisse slightly worse. First of all, you will be waiting on the TMs to make its moveset good. Unlike Meowstic, who at least has the female form to get early access to good moves, Aromatisse has no such luxury. Secondly, Aromatisse is slower than a turtle texted with mittens on, or trying to open a website with Internet Explorer in 2025. Pick your analogy. With an absolutely gross 29 speed and not much bulk behind it, Aromatisse is incredibly susceptible to being worn down in battle. Third, it's a trait evolution. I don't want to have to whip out a second 3DS in the year 2025. And finally, and arguably the most importantly, it gets mogged by basically every other fairy type. Wigglytuff, Clefable, Florges, Gardevoir. Again, these Pokemon all accomplish the same things that Aromatisse does, and so much more. In fact, the best thing about playing Pokemon X is that Slurpuff is just a strictly better version of Aromatisse. But honestly, Fairy isn't even as good of a main story type in Kalos as you might expect. Between Karina and Drasna, they really don't beat any significant NPCs. If anything, Team Flare and the other commonly used poison types are just going to give you a harder time. Number 6, Dedenne. Surprisingly, our first Pika clone to make the list since Plusle and Minun, although the last two are both dishonorable mentions. Dedenne unfortunately also suffers from the Pyroar syndrome, where it's designed as a special attacker but barely has any moves to work with. Even less than Pyroar, if you can believe it, as Thunderbolt is pretty much its only reliable option. It doesn't even learn Dazzling Gleam or Moonblast in this generation, which just feels like a huge slap in the face. Nuzzle is at least a good utility move that makes catching Pokemon easier, but sadly, that's all Dedenne will be doing for most of your playthrough. Since the only major flying type trainers are Sky Battlers in this region, a type of battle that Dedenne can't even compete in, electric types in general are far less valuable in this region. Unless you're a Molga, who is ironically kinda good in this region. There aren't even any bird keepers here. As such, the only significant battle Dedenne helps with is Seabold in the Pokemon League. And even then, almost any other electric type does it better. Dedenne's stats are simply too bad to compete with any other Pokemon of its types. Hey, we're not done yet. We got 3 regions coming up after this one, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss those. Number 5, Barbaracle. I honestly wasn't expecting this guy to make the list. Barbaracle has a fantastic ability in Tough Claws, really high attack and defense, and its pre-evolution Binacle is available relatively early. But the more I looked into Barbaracle, the worse it got. Off the bat, Binacle is one of the worst Pokemon in the game without much competition. And it doesn't evolve until level 39. Is this guy secretly a Unova straggler? Considering that the highest possible level you can catch Binacle is at level 25, it's going to be an EXP share bencher for a good long while before you can actually use it. But even when you do evolve it, Barbaracle is still surprisingly bad. This Pokemon doesn't learn Razor Shell until level 48, Cross Chop until level 55, or Stone Edge until level 60. This means Barbaracle is still largely useless up until the climax of the Team Flare crisis. At the very least, it does perform well against Team Flare's Grunts, Admins, and Boss, and has some favorable matchups late in the game against Wolfric and Malva, but come on, is beating Wolfric even worth putting on your resume? He's arguably the easiest gym leader in the entire game, and Malva's not much better. Barbaracle's biggest problem is that he's just taking up room on your team until the very end of the game. He would be less offensive if you found him right before the last gym. But because you have to catch him early and keep him in the back of your party for so long, he's honestly just a net negative. Number 4, Vivian. As the sole bug type from the Kalos region, Vivian sadly did not keep up the good reputation that Unova built for this type. Vivian is once again a reversion to the typical bad early game bug type. I guess the good news for Vivian is that Kalos is surprisingly not awful for bugs. Vivian actually fares pretty well against Karina and Olympia, and by learning Quiver Dance at level 45, it actually stays usable into the late game. Compound Eyes and Hurricane is also not a bad combination, honestly. But it is going to struggle with the common things that most bug types will. Too many weaknesses, stretches of uselessness, and a very bad matchup against the regional evil team. But hey, despite all of that, it has more redeeming factors than the Pokemon ahead. Just wait. Number 3, Avalugg. Have I mentioned how much I hate this Pokemon before? And this guy was on my original team of 6 all the way back in 2013. What a fool I was. Avalugg is as tough as an iceberg on the physical side and as fragile as the Titanic on the special side. If you get hit with any special move, it doesn't even have to be super effective, you are cooked. As a slow ice type, it is just the epitome of bad Pokemon design. And somehow, it's only number 3, which I guess is saying a lot about the top 2. Like Pyroar and Dedenne, Avalugg also has issues on the physical side. It has a really high attack stat of 117, but the relatively weak Ice Fang and the situationally useful Avalanche are all it really learns. At least until he finally gets Crunch at level 60 freaking 5. I would say this Pokemon at least beats Drasna, but realistically, no it doesn't. Drasna uses 3 special attackers which are all making quick work of Avalugg. The only true positive of Avalugg is that its defense stat is so astronomically high that if you're Nuzlocking and you know your opponent only has physical moves, it is a very safe switch-in. That aside, I really can't say anything good about Avalugg. It's the reason why Wolfric sucks. It's the reason why Gita sucks. It's the reason why my X and Y team from 2013 sucked. It's just bad. Number 2, Carbink. Look, I've said it before, I'll say it again. Defensive support Pokemon just aren't the vibe in a main story playthrough. And Carbink fits that description to a T. Essentially being the modern day Shuckle, Carbink is all sponge with no attack. As a fairy rock type, it does get access to some decent attacking moves like Stone Edge and Moonblast, but it sadly lacks the tools to take advantage of them. If Carbink could learn Shell Smash or even Power Trick to give itself enough attack, like Shuckle, it could be a fun Pokemon to mess around with in a main story playthrough. But for whatever reason, Game Freak decided against giving either of these rather fitting moves to Carbink. You can plainly see from Carbink's move pool of things like Reflect, Guard Split, and Skill Swap that this Pokemon was clearly designed for competitive play. But unlike Shuckle, it doesn't even do that well, which is why it lands at the number 2 spot. As for this region's dishonorable mentions, well, there's not many because, well, Kalos doesn't have many Pokemon. First of all, Klefki. Klefki is a very weird case of a Pokemon. In competitive environments, this Pokemon is actually quite good. With Prankster Thunderwave, Spikes, Magnet Rise, and Swagger, well, at least before this Pokemon got that move banned back in the X and Y era, Klefki surprisingly has all the keys to be a greatly annoying utility Pokemon. Did you see what I did there? Oh, you did? And it wasn't funny? Oh. But this is a main story playthrough we're talking about, where, sadly, toying around with the NPCs is not nearly as rewarding. Outside of Swagger and Foul Play, Klefki itself can't particularly hit hard. It's not really a Pokemon suited for playing through the main story. The best thing going for it is that it at least matches up against most of the significant late-game trainers pretty well. But realistically, other Fairy or Steel-type Pokemon do this at a much faster pace than Klefki. Its middling stats mean that you're probably in for a longer than usual playthrough if you do decide to use it. Definitely not the worst option, but far from the most convenient. And unfortunately, this is the first time in any video so far that I have to mention a starter Pokemon, Chestnut. Being a slow grass fighting type just leaves this guy open to all sorts of common weaknesses. On top of that, it struggles in every single gym aside from Grants. It loses to Viola, Karina, Valerie, Olympia, Wolfric, all of Team Flare, Malva. Even Seabold isn't as good of a matchup as you'd think thanks to Starmie and Gyarados. And of course, Diantha too. Kalos is unfortunately just very aggressive towards this type combination. And Chestnut has to compete against 2 very good starters who excel at sweeping NPCs, and even Mega Venusaur for a slot in the team as the honorary grass type. However, at the end of the day, Chestnut is a starter Pokemon with incredibly good stats and a wide move pool, so ultimately I could not place it in the top 10. Which leaves us with number 1, Diggersby. Now yes, I know, Diggersby does get huge power which saves its competitive viability. But unfortunately, without trading, there is no way to obtain a huge power Diggersby during the main story. So that pitiful 56 attack is what you're stuck with. Its ground typing does somewhat set it apart from other Route 1 mammals, well, I guess Route 2 in this game, since Route 1 is literally nothing, but because Diggersby's offensive stats are so low, that extra type is just more common weaknesses instead of good coverage. Even among all the Pokemon you catch in the first handful of routes, I don't think there's a single one worse than Bunnelby. Well, maybe Burmy. But to put it simply, Diggersby's terrible stats and lack of a good main story ability leaves this Pokemon with no real niche. It is effectively the most replaceable Pokemon in the game, because anything else would have a role no matter how small. But with that being said, that's gonna do it for today's video. Be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe for more videos just like this one, and I'll see you guys next time. The Alola region, home to beautiful landscapes, blue skies, and as always, a handful of not so great Pokemon. So just like the previous 6 regions, I'm going to break down who the 10 worst Pokemon are to use in your average Alola region playthrough. And since Alola has a relatively small new roster of Pokemon, I decided that I will be including the regional variants as part of this list as well. So good morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR, and here are Alola's worst Pokemon. Number 10, Wishiwashi. Placing Wishy-Washy on this list was tough because, well, Wishy-Washy is just kinda wishy-washy. In its solo form, it is the weakest of all Pokemon stat-wise, but in its school form, which it unlocks at level 20, it is one of the strongest non-legendary Pokemon in the game. It has incredibly high stats in everything except HP and speed, which means Wishy-Washy gets worn down a lot easier than you'd think. Especially in double battles and totem Pokemon battles where you're getting attacked more than once a turn. In situations like that, you'll probably be seeing solo Wishy-Washy more than you'd like, and at that point, you're probably just dead. It's kinda like Alola's version of Archeops, but as good as Wishy-Washy's school form stats are, it does have another Achilles heel to worry about, its move pool. Aside from Bulldoze, which you can buy as a TM around the midpoint of the game, Wishy-Washy is stuck exclusively attacking with Brine and Feint Attack for most of the adventure. All the TMs that it really wants, like Earthquake and Ice Beam, are found at the very end. And since Alola has no shortage of good water types with infinitely better coverage, it makes it hard to justify using Wishy-Washy for most of the game. It's fun in the beginning when you're able to steamroll most of your opponents, even with its relatively weak moves, but by the time you make it to Ula Ula Island, Wishy-Washy's routine becomes just a bit grating and inconvenient. It still holds a lot of potential, which is why I decided to lead off with it though. I bet everybody's Wishy-Washy experience is just a little bit different, so it's hard to say that it's worse than 10th. Number 9, Drampa. Drampa is the only Alola region Pokemon that I would say suffers from what I would like to call Johto syndrome. That being, it's just non-existent until the end of the game. Being the moon counterpart to Turtonator, it just feels incredibly unfair that Turtonator gets to enjoy being found relatively early on Ula Ula Island, while Drampa can't be found until Mount Lanakila just before the Pokemon League. And Ultra Sun and Moon could have fixed this. They actually allow you to enter the base of Mount Lanakila as soon as you get to Tapu Village, which would have put Drampa around the same location as Turtonator. But for some reason, Drampa still exists exclusively on the peak of the mountain. Now, when you get one, it's not horrendous by any means. It has a fantastic 135 special attack and a rainbow of moves you can teach it, which makes it a great last-minute Pokemon to add to your team if you're Nuzlocking, but it just sucks that it misses out on so much of the game. I don't get why they made this decision. It wouldn't be broken or anything, his low speed keeps his crazy special attack in check. Honestly, you could argue that Wishy-Washy is more unbalanced than this guy is. But as it remains, Drampa is tragically one of Alola's least usable Pokemon. Number 8, Shiinotic. In addition to being absolutely terrifying and showing up in your nightmares, Shiinotic is also dragging your team down with it. While being a Grass Fairy type does give this Pokemon a pretty favorable matchup against most notable trainers, including Olivia, Nanu, and Hapu, Shiinotic's biggest weakness is that it doesn't get any of its best moves, including Giga Drain, Spore, or Moonblast, until after level 30. So for quite a while, it's not doing much. Aside from Sludge Bomb, it also doesn't really get a lot of coverage outside of its two main stab moves either. Thankfully, Shiinotic does evolve pretty fast at level 24, so you don't have to suffer through Moorlull for long. However, one aspect that does not improve upon evolving is its speed, as it remains one of the slowest Pokemon in the Alola region, and believe me when I say that is a low, low bar. Its relatively low HP stat also means that, like Wishy-Washy, this Pokemon is not nearly as tanky as you might expect, meaning Shiinotic gets worn down incredibly easy in battles, which is not good for a Pokemon whose moveset is built around winning long, drawn-out fights. Number 7, Comfey. Continuing the trend of great Pokemon who were surprisingly bad in their home region, Comfey is another weird case of a Pokemon. Comfey boasts amazing stats, especially for how early in the game you can catch it. And as a pure fairy type, there's not much it ever has to be worried about. The main issue is just its move pool. It really can't do significant damage for most of the game, as Draining Kiss will be its best move until you're finally able to pick up a Dazzling Gleam TM in Vast Pony Canyon. So for a Pokemon that doesn't evolve, Comfey's graph of usability kinda looks like a reverse bell curve. It'll be great when you catch it, terrible for most of the game, and then suddenly kinda good again at the end. But there is a massive asterisk I have to put on this. See, Comfey in Gen 7 learns Draining Kiss at level 7. But in Lush Jungle, it spawns at levels 18 through 21. And if you happen to catch it at level 19 or higher, then Sweet Kiss will boot Draining Kiss from its moveset. So you actively have to look for the lowest leveled Comfey if you actually want to do damage. Ironic, isn't it? Of course, this is because Alola's move reminder is placed on the top of Mount freaking Lanakila of all places. literally at the Pokemon League. That being said, Comfey does at least get Petal Blizzard in its 20s, and in doubles, it can be a phenomenal supporting Pokemon with Triage boosting the priority of Floral Healing. So if you're doing a hardcore Nuzlocke with no healing items, this Pokemon can get you out of some really sketchy situations. But it doesn't change the fact that for most of the game, Comfey is not as good as it really should be. Number 6, Alolan Sandslash. Unfortunately, most Alolan forms were not the spectacular upgrades that a ton of people were imagining they would be. Well, unless you're Alolan Ninetales, which just kinda rubs salt in the wound of Sandslash, who is Ninetales' version counterpart in these games. The first issue is that it's found a lot later in the game than it should be, an unfortunate consequence of its typing. Naturally, Alola being a tropical region means that there are very few areas that can feasibly contain ice types, so Alolan Sandshrew isn't obtainable until you reach the Tapu village in the later half of the third island. Even though Sandshrew has almost always been an early game Pokemon, the Ultra games had a chance to fix this as they reworked Seaward Cave and the first island into a home for ice types, but oddly, Alolan Sandshrew still doesn't appear there. So from the moment you catch it, you pretty much know that you won't be able to use it until it evolves. Its stats are just not built for that point in the game. Fortunately, you don't have to go far until you get the Ice Stone in Po Town, but even after evolving, you'll quickly realize that there wasn't much of an upgrade. Alolan Sandslash just has terrible synergy between its stats and its typing. Ice and Steel go together like oil and water. Most of the time they're just compiling their common weaknesses on top of each other. And of course, instead of making this guy a fast sweeper like the OG Sandslash, this one is slow and defensive. In competitive context, Alolan Sandslash usually gets around this with its ability Slush Rush, but since it's a hidden ability, it's sadly stuck with Snow Cloak in the main story. A relatively lame ability that requires you to add Hail to your moveset to get any use out of it. That alone should tell you a lot. The only trial on paper that Alolan Sandslash will help you with is the Dragon Trial, but of course that's headed by a Totem Komuo who is taking Alolan Sandslash to the dumpster with its very first fighting move. Same goes for Kahili in the Pokemon League. It can probably defeat a few of her Pokemon pretty easily, but she does use Bylay-style Oricorio in both pairs of games, and she gets a Hawlucha in the Ultra game, so Sandslash sadly remains limited even in its best battles. Hi, it's me again. Just wanted to say that if you're enjoying, I'd really appreciate if you subscribed. We still have 2 regions left to go, so don't miss out. Number 5, Crabominable. Okay, so to be honest, most of the problem with Crabominable is with its pre-evolution Crabrawler. Crabrawler is actually a very good early game Pokemon with favorable matchups against the first trial and Olivia's Grand Trial, and has a very solid move pool to back up its above average stats. But as you wait and wait and wait for it to evolve, its stats quickly become below average. While today Crabrawler just evolves with an Ice Stone like Alolan Sandshrew, in the Alola game specifically it has to go to Mount Lanakila, a recurring place of suffering in this region it seems. Which means in Sun and Moon, this Route 2 Pokemon isn't evolving until you catch the Box Art Legendary. This means you get Crabominable for a grand total of 6 trainer battles before the end credits roll. Who on earth signed off on this? Oh, probably the same guy who decided that the Move Tutor and Drampaw should be on the same mountain. Got it. All 3 of them are just chilling on this mountain, enjoying the fact that they're making this game just a little bit worse. Now thankfully, the Ultra games do fix Crabrawler, as well as its other unfortunate partner in crime, Chargebug, who now evolves at the Blush Mountain Power Plant. Crabrawler evolves shortly afterward, now that you're allowed to visit the very base of Mount Lanakila. However, while Vikavolt will soon become a useful Pokemon, Crabominable will not. All of its best matchups are already behind it by this point in the game, and the added ice typing really doesn't help at this stage in the game. It's just adding extra weaknesses. This Pokemon is going to struggle against Guzma's newly revamped team in the Ultra games that includes Masquerain and Pinsir, both carrying super effective moves. It will lose to the Aether Foundation's higher-ups who have a tendency to lean more into Psychic-type Pokemon, loses to Komodo just like Sandslash did, it will lose against Mullane in the League, and also has a complicated relationship with Kahili. I think what makes Crabominable definitively worse than Alolan Sandslash is not just its horrendously late evolution in Sun and Moon, but also the fact that this Pokemon is surprisingly not that tanky. With Sandslash, you know that you at least have a reliable physical wall. With Crabominable, he's all attack with not much else. And with its typing leaving it weak to seemingly everything, this has to be one of the region's worst Nuzlocke Pokemon. Number 4, Lurantis. Unfortunately, Lurantis is just a strictly worse version of another pure grass type found in the exact same area, Serena. Comparing their stats head to head, Serenas are higher in every single category except for special attack, which Lurantis doesn't really use anyway since it pretty much only learns physical moves. They both have the same primary ability in Leaf Guard, which is bad, don't use it on either of these Pokemon. But Serena has a secondary ability in Queenly Majesty, which blocks all priority moves, which is actually a fairly decent ability. Yes, Lurantis has Contrary, which works great with Superpower, but Contrary is a hidden ability so it can't be obtained during the main campaign, and Superpower is also Move Tutor exclusive in the Ultra games. It can't be taught at all in Sun and Moon. Serena also evolves at level 29, since that's when Steenie learned Stomp in Gen 7, and Lurantis evolves slightly later at level 34. That may not sound like a huge difference, but trust me, Fomantis' stats are terrible. Waiting until 34 means that it is missing out on its best battles in the game with Totem Wishiwashi and Olivia. That really drags this Pokemon's value down, because grass types in general will struggle a lot until fighting Hapu all the way at the end of Pony Island. And that is a long stretch to go. The only good aspects about Lurantis are that it learns Leaf Blade quite early at level 23 as a Fomantis, and it also gets Leech Life via TM pretty early. Aside from that, it's a pretty horrendously outclassed Pokemon. It really does not help that Serena is right there and is just strictly better. And even then, Serena is not great in Alola. I know I've been hyping it up a lot, but it's a borderline dishonorable mention at best. Number 3, Oranguru. Sorry to everybody who bought Pokemon Moon, this has probably been a painful video for you so far. But Oranguru is just not a Pokemon built for the main story. With its signature move Instruct, it's pretty clear that this guy was designed around VGC and double battles, of which there are painfully few during the main campaign. In addition to this, Oranguru is one of the very few new Psychic types introduced in the Alola region. Why is this such a bad thing? Well, many years ago I made my worst types in every region videos, and if you recall, if there's one thing worse than being a grass type in Johto, it's being a Psychic type in Alola. While Oranguru is thankfully found late enough to dodge its bad matchups against Totem Raticate, Araquanid, and Alolan Marowak, and is part normal type so the Ghost Trial isn't so scary to it, it still beats pretty much nobody in the entire game. Totem Vikavolt or Togedemaru, depending on which game you're playing, will both give it trouble. Obviously, Guzma and Team Skull are a big no-no. Nanu is completely wiping this guy out. Even Como summons a Caesar to deal with Psychic types, so that's no good. And of course, of all fairy types, Rabombi becomes the last totem in the Ultra games. It is rough for Psychic types in Alola. Bruxish and Alolan Raichu can at least fall back on their good movesets and stats to skate by, but Oranguru catches no breaks. On that topic, Oranguru gets almost no coverage until the very end of the game, as all the TMs that it can learn like Thunderbolt, Energy Ball, and more are gated by the last ride Pokemon, Machamp. Which means for the wide majority of the game, Zen Headbutt is likely your only reliable move. Number 2, Alolan Raticate. It's just bad. Can I end it there? No? The people are invested in the video and want to see more? Okay, guess you're right. Anyway, Alolan Raticate really gains no benefit from being a Dark-type Pokemon. It pretty much just means that it's unusable against Hala and Totem Araquanid in the Ultra games, and then after level 20, its stats aren't even good anymore. Although, calling them good to begin with is giving this Pokemon way too much credit. Honestly, Cantonian Raticate would just straight up be better in this region, which is kinda funny. Yes, it has Hustle to make up for its low attack stat, but do you really want to be missing 20% of the time? This Pokemon is just unreliable in every single facet. Avoid it at all costs. As always, let's go to our dishonorable mentions. After the regional rodent won the last 2 regions, you probably expected Gumshoos to make this list. But I'm happy to report that Gumshoos is good for more than just a Donald Trump impression. Because that attack stat is huge, it's the biggest attack stat I've ever seen. And with Strong Jaw, this Pokemon is a better Dark type than Alolan Raticate, which is crazy because it's not even a Dark type. Yes, its low speed and defense is all but ensure that it will not survive an entire Nuzlocke, but it is a phenomenal early game Pokemon. Which is honestly better than just being mediocre across the board. Next is Togedemaru, who despite being a massive upgrade from Dedenne, is still a Pika clone at the end of the day. Electric Steel is a pretty great typing until you realize that it has to compete against Magnezone of all things, who is able to evolve into its final form in the same location where you first catch Togedemaru. On top of that, Togedemaru has virtually no coverage in Sun and Moon, with its lone Steel type move being Gyro Ball, which doesn't really fit this Pokemon well. Thankfully, move tutors in the Ultra games gave it access to Iron Head, and Zing Zap is a phenomenal special move. So if the option to catch the far superior Magnemite has passed you by, Togedemaru is not a horrendous alternative, at least in the Ultra games. And lastly, Cosmog and Cosmoem. No, you can't use them during the main story without trading, which is the only reason they're not on the list. But if they were, they would certainly be number 1, since they are literally the only Pokemon in existence with no attacking moves. effectively making them the worst Pokemon in existence. But since you can't even use them until post-game, they get spared from this video. And number 1, Pyukumuku. Pyukumuku is a pretty shameless reskin of Wobbuffet, but unlike Wobbuffet, it doesn't even have Shadow Tag to make it broken. And it completely messes up the gimmick of dealing damage through counters. For starters, it doesn't even learn Mirror Coat in Gen 7, just counter. So it can literally only do damage to physical attackers. They also completely distributed its stats wrong. Unlike Wobbuffet, who has astronomically high HP and low defenses so it can counter more efficiently, Pyukumuku has high defenses, but almost no HP. So it really doesn't counter for a lot of damage. This also messes up its signature ability Innards Out, which does damage to the opponent equal to how much HP Pyukumuku had before it was knocked out. Ignoring how bad that ability is for a Nuzlocke, this means Pyukumuku isn't even a good sacrifice Pokemon, as Innards Out is unlikely to one-shot anything attacking it. Which means its actual most efficient way of dealing damage is by using Toxic, a move it learns criminally late at level 45 in Alola. Pyukumuku, in all honesty, is just one of those flavor Pokemon. I struggle to even call it a gimmick because the gimmick is just badly designed and doesn't even work. They just made it because, hey, wouldn't it be funny to have a sea cucumber Pokemon in the Hawaiian region? And you know what? It is pretty funny. I'm glad it exists. I'm just never going to use it, and you probably shouldn't either because it will fill your life with misery and woe. The Alola games are already slow enough without a Pyukumuku on your team. But that's gonna do it for this video. Be sure to like this video if you enjoy, subscribe for more videos just like this one, and I'll see you guys next time. Generation 8 of Pokemon was a weird generation. And I don't just mean weird because it's British, although that is kinda weird. We got Pokemon with G-Max forms, DLC Pokemon, regional variants, the return of cross-gen evolutions. So finding the 10 worst Galar Pokemon is going to be an interesting challenge. Oh, and I'm not even including all the new Hisuian forms and evolutions, because that would make this whole video impossible. So good morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR, and here are the 10 worst Pokemon to use in the Galar region. Number 10, Dubwool. Yeah, I know, probably significantly lower than you expected for the Route 1 normal type, but honestly, Galar's early game Pokemon are surprisingly competent. But look, there's one main reason why Dubwool is here, and that's simply that it's worse than Greedent, Galar's other early game normal type. Now, in the beginning, Wooloo might be the same or even marginally better than Squavit, but after evolving, the wheels definitely fall off the Wooloo hype train. Comparing their stats side by side, Greedent's massive HP more than makes up for its shortcomings in its other defenses. It has far more attack than Dubwool, and the low speed doesn't really matter much considering Dubwool is still a below average speed Pokemon. Greedent also goes on to have one of the best move pools in the entire game, including early access to powerful stab body slam at level 20, while Dubwool is sadly stuck looking for TR99 body press for the rest of the game. Wow, remember TRs? I sure didn't until making this video. But yeah, like many Pokemon in past videos, Dubwool sadly just loses the comparison game. The existence of Greedent just makes it hard to justify using this guy, unless you're Hop and you're just sentimentally attached to your first Pokemon. But even he benches Dubwool for a stretch of the game when he gets on his Sigma grind set, so that says a lot about Dubwool. Number 9, Cursula. This poor family cannot stay away from my videos, huh? First it ranked in Johto, now it evolved, and it still can't stay off the list in Galar. Looking at Cursula's stats, you immediately see the best and the worst that this Pokemon has to offer. It's an incredible special attacker and special wall, but is horribly frail on the physical side with no speed to really help it out, meaning it gets scared out of battle by probably half the Pokemon in the game. Its massive special attack also isn't as big of a plus as you may imagine, as the best moves it gets by leveling up are Power Gem and Hex at 80 and 65 base powers respectively, which means Cursula has to turn to TRs and TMs to piece together a complete move pool, where it can at least gain Will-O-Wisp, Shadow Ball, Scald, and more. However, the cons quickly start stacking up for this Pokemon, as it evolves significantly later than most of this game's Ghost types at level 38, and Ghost-type Pokemon don't perform particularly well in the Galar region, as it has to fight Alistair due to being a shield exclusive, a battle it will probably lose due to its lower speed, and then has to fight the series' first Dark-type gym leader Piers, and deal with a Dark-dedicated evil team with Team Yell, and of course the rival Marnie. And when this region has so many better ghost types to offer, like Frostlass, Golurk, Gengar, and Chandelure, picking the mono ghost type of Cursula becomes a lot harder to justify. Even Runerigus succeeds at being an all-around better tank and has way more coverage to work with. Still, I would say Cursula's not awful, just outclassed in many ways. Number 8, Colossal. Oh boy, a slow fire rock type with weaknesses to everything in the game. Where have I seen this movie before? Now, its pre-evolutions, Roly-Poly and Carkol, are actually placed very well in the game. They're found in Galar Mine number 1 and have amazing matchups against 2 of the first 3 gyms. But sadly, this evolution line peaks at level 27 when Carkol learns Incinerate, which coincidentally is around the same level you'll be fighting Kabu at. From there, Colossal won't learn another useful move until, well, whenever you find the appropriate TMs. For whatever reason, this Pokemon learns all of its worst moves at the highest levels. Sure, Burn Up is 130 base power, but you can only use it once per battle, so that kinda blows. Furthermore, unless you're facing Melanie and Shield, Colossal won't win another major battle for the rest of the game. Its incredibly low speed in tandem with its terrible typing makes it a very difficult Pokemon to use outside of the few Dynamax settings in the game, as it doesn't have nearly as much survivability as you might expect. So I would recommend using Scorch instead. I know it's a bug type, but it's actually really good and just does everything Colossal does, but better if I'm being real. In fact, this is exactly what I did when I first played Pokemon Sword and Shield. I think around the 6th gym, I dropped Colossal from the team and replaced it with Scorch, and things immediately just got better. Number 7, Alcremie. This one pains me because Alcremie is one of my favorite Gen 8 Pokemon. I actually really like the spinning at different times of day to get different flavor Alcremies. I think it's kind of a fun and cute gimmick. But like a lot of other Gen 8 Pokemon, Alcremie's biggest flaw is with its lack of good moves. Dazzling Gleam is pretty much the only worthwhile move this Pokemon naturally learns, and then you'll be hunting down the TR for Energy Ball as its only other attacking move. As unfortunately, the rest of Alcremie's good TMs are gated to the Battle Tower in the postgame, which really harms this Pokemon's main story viability. Man, why do Gen 8 Pokemon have so much worse movesets than anything from Gen 6 or Gen 7? It's a very weird regression. These guys are making Pyroar look good, and that is not good! What's really nice about Alcremie is that most of the sweets that cause it to evolve can be obtained very early in the game by just challenging the Battle Cafe and Motostoke every day, and then you have a super strong Pokemon by the first gym. But the annoying part about Alcremie is that if you don't get these randomly awarded sweets, then you have to wait until Hammerlock to finally evolve it, which is far too long to go with Milcery and its awful stats. While it's certainly not the best fairy type in the region due to its limited move pool, Fairy is still a pretty valuable type in the region. Especially in Sword when you have to fight Bee, Piers, Raihan, and of course Marnie as a recurring rival. Number 6, Cramorant. Okay, admittedly, I think I got Mandela affected into thinking this Pokemon had like far-fetched level stats, but honestly, it's not that bad. It's just not that good either. Its stats are very middling across the board, which is certainly the worst part of this Pokemon, especially when it's a water-flying type. A combination of the 2 most common types in the game. So when you excel in nothing, it means there are way more candidates looking to take your job. He's like a fast food worker who is just barely skating by. But at least he can make his coworkers laugh with a kinda funny and situationally useful ability in Gulp Missile, which guarantees the opponent will lose at least 25% of their HP every time Cramorant uses Surf or Dive. Surprisingly, not a terrible gimmick. Being found around the midway point in the game, Cramorant is a pretty competent Pokemon for a little while, but its lack of an evolution means that it struggles to keep up in the late game. Though, as a water type, it does at least boast favorable matchups against Gordy and Raihan, who primarily uses ground types despite being a dragon trainer. There's not really a whole lot else to say about this Pokemon, it just suffers from being an average fish in a very large pond. It's probably the last relatively solid Pokemon on this list until we start getting into real trash territory, though. Ooh, do you know who else is in trash territory right now? You, because you're not subscribed to the channel! If you like the videos, it's okay, you can sub, I won't bite. Maybe. Unless you really want me to. Number 5, Arctovish. Easily the worst of the Galar region's 4 fossil Pokemon, and probably the most forgettable of them all too, since Dracovish is just much better in every feasible way. It's also one of the 2 fossilized Pokemon where it's extra annoying to get both of its fossils, because the combination of fossils you need are exclusive to different games. Why did they do this, bro? Do they just hate fun? Anyway, it is not worth it in the slightest. For starters, it easily has the worst typing of the 4 fossils. Water Ice is not really unique or doing anything for this Pokemon's main story viability. It also shares a big problem with the other fossils, that being its level up learn set is absolutely atrocious until about level 63, when you've probably beaten the game already. For some reason, all of them are this way except for Arctazult, who at least gets a few good moves relatively early. Honestly, Dracovich's level up learn set might be just as bad, if not worse. But Dracovish is such a competitive menace that there is no way I could ever put him on this list. But yeah, Arctovish is a slow ice type, his moves suck, his abilities suck, Freeze Dry is maybe its only saving grace. That move is so good, but otherwise, yeah, he's a flop. Number 4, Eldegoss. There's just something about grass-type Pokemon and refusing to adapt to modern-day standards, and Eldegoss perfectly encapsulates this behavior. As between its almost entirely grass-exclusive learn set and stats that feel like they're actively harming it, Eldegoss is maybe the most Gen 2, Gen 8 Pokemon I've ever seen. This is one of those Pokemon that functions decently as a utility Pokemon in competitive formats. Okay, decently might be a stretch, but finding a reason to use this thing in a main story playthrough is very difficult. Like Cramorant, being a grass type means that you have tons of common competition. And with this region including old heavy hitters like Ludicolo, Shiftry, and Ferrothorn, Eldegoss is going to have a tough time cementing its status as a permanent team member. Even Milo replaced this guy with a G-Max, Flapple, or Appleton in the postgame, so even the grass-type gym leader can't go to bat for this guy. Eldegoss's biggest plus is that you capture it just before Nessa's gym, so it does get one pretty easy fight at the beginning of the game, but from there, it's mostly just pain. Unless you're playing Pokemon Sword and have to fight Gordy, Eldegoss probably won't be assisting you in another major fight for the rest of the game. Number 3, Thievul. Now, normally I like to cut the early game Pokemon a bit of a break when it comes to these rankings, unless they're just so overwhelmingly bad compared to the competition, like Diggersby was in Gen 6, and unfortunately, as much as I wanted to cut Thievul a break, this was the highest I could justifiably get him. Just in terms of raw stats, this is probably the single worst fully evolved Pokemon from this region. It has like okay special attack and speed, and that's about it. Though I guess the programmers didn't get the message because they decided that Snarl should be the only special move it gets by leveling up. Aside from that, this Pokemon will be on the hunt for TRs to help piece together its pitiful move pool. It also doesn't help that Dark is a bit of a lame duck type in this region. The only gym Dark beats in this entire game is Alistair's, and that only applies to players of Pokemon Shield. And Sword, yeah, he gets his mustache ripped off by me. The only true advantage that Thievul offers is that it evolves the earliest of all of Galar's early route Pokemon. For some reason, everything else like Wooloo, Squavit, Choodle, and Yamper all evolve in their mid-20s, which means for a very short stint of the game, Thievul could be seen as your ace Pokemon. But once he reaches his 30s, he realizes that much like a college frat boy, that the best years are already behind him. Number 2, Ice-Cube. The honorary gimmick Pokemon of this region, you knew that Ice-Cube's odds of dodging this list were slimmer than getting through a Mario Kart World race without getting hit, aka 0. Anyway, Ice-Cube is an Ice-type Pokemon. Man, we're already off to a bad start. It only appears at the very end of the game, with the earliest encounter being at the Lake of Outrage. Now, if you choose to catch it there, you'll at least have it for Raihan's gym, which is definitely its best battle in the game. Well, at least until Duraludon comes out and skewers it with a max Steel Spike. But getting back to its characteristics, Ice-Cube is mostly defined by its very gimmicky ability, Ice Face, which protects Ice-Cube from the first physical attack of every battle, and once the ice breaks, Ice-Cube loses most of its defenses and its speed skyrockets. It's like a weird hybrid of Mimikyu's Disguise and Minior's Shields Down. But unlike either of those Pokemon, Ice-Cube sadly lacks any way to effectively use its first turn. Mimikyu usually sets up a Sword Stance, and Minior can use Shell Smash. The only way to get an effective setup move on Ice-Cube is to breed it with Belly Drum, which is something I'm willing to bet that most players of Pokemon Shield are not going to do for this mediocre penguin. But even if you did, using Belly Drum is not 100% safe. As mentioned before, Ice Face only blocks the first physical move of the battle. So if you willingly cut your HP in half on the first turn, it becomes extremely easy for the opponent to KO you with a special move without breaking the ice and turning Ice-Cube into a sweeper. Why am I putting so much emphasis on Ice-Cube needing Belly Drum? Well, because otherwise it has absolutely nothing to do with that amazing speed once it gets it. Ice-Cube's attack stats are horrible for such a frail Pokemon. With 80 attack and 65 special attack, it needs all the setup help it can get. And very cruelly, most of its level up move pool consists of special attacks, with Headbutt being the only physical move it learns naturally in Gen 8. Between the TMs needed and having to breed for Belly Drum only to still have a pretty horrible Pokemon afterward, this guy is just not worth the effort. As for this region's dishonorable mentions, well, I guess Greedent has to be one. I literally did mention how Double just barely edged him out for the list. Not too much else to say since I already went in depth on him earlier. Up next we have Appleton, who is an unfortunate case of a split evolution line gone wrong. Unlike older split families like Slowpoke or Ralts, Appleton is clearly outclassed by its brother Flapple, and unlike your split family, he doesn't get 2 Christmases. And you know what? Things have gotten worse. Now their long-lost brother Diplin has come back, and he just has a whole nother evolution. So why would you ever pick the original 2? Applin is also one of the worst Pokemon in the game. It's literally just designed to fill space on your team until you get to Hammerlock and it finally gets its evolution item. Grass Dragon also just doesn't work as well for a slow, tanky Pokemon like Appleton as it does for a fast, offensive one like Flapple. And lastly, Berserker. Its stats are quite badly balanced. It's almost like a reverse Cursula. Really, the only things that save this guy are his typing. Mono Steel is actually really good, and both of his abilities make him hit like a truck. Just know that if you are against a fast special attacker, he will probably not live to see the end of the turn. So a lot of risk management has to go into using this Pokemon. And number 1, Stonjourner. Or as I like to call him, Galarian Avalugg. Yup, they somehow took an already bad Pokemon and, well, I don't know if I can call him worse, but he's certainly not better. He's also somehow worse than his shield counterpart Ice-Cube. Likewise, he's only found on Route 10 in the Lake of Outrage at the very end of the game, and honestly, he will not be doing much. Considering the only major opponents you have left are Raihan, who defeats it easily with a Sandstorm team, Nessa, who obviously wins with their water types, Bee, because Pokemon Sword exclusive, who also wins with their fighting types, Raihan again, and then Leon, who is just going to use Max Overgrowth with his G-Max Charizard, because that's realistically the only feasible situation where somebody would be dumb enough to send out Stonjourner. Even removing the context of where you get him and the uphill battles he has to fight, just look at Stonjourner broadly speaking. Between his mono rock typing, lopsided stats, move pool that looks like it came straight from Gen 2, and an ability that does absolutely nothing during the main campaign, yes, Power Spot doesn't even power up Stonjourner's own moves, just his allies. He basically has no ability. This is undoubtedly a horrendous Pokemon, no matter the region. It's hard to call this guy worse than Ice-Cube, but at least Ice-Cube has some very minor scenarios where it performs well. And at least Ice-Cube's version-exclusive league fight against Alistair isn't directly screwing him over like Bee is doing to Stonjourner. There are genuinely no redeeming qualities to this Pokemon. So that'll wrap things up for the worst Pokemon in the Galar region. Do you agree or disagree with any takes? Let me know in the comment section down below. But don't forget to like this video if you enjoy, subscribe for more videos just like this one, and I'll see you guys next time. At long last, we finally reached the Paldea region in our worst Pokemon series. And despite giving us far more Pokemon than the past 3 regions, this has to be the hardest region to rank so far. Almost every single Pokemon in this region is good, so finding even 10 mediocre ones was a pretty monumental task. So hey, if your favorite Gen 9 Pokemon ends up in this list, don't take it personally. There are not many bad Pokemon in this region. This is a really hard list to make. Number 10, Veluza. Gita uses this Pokemon, so you should already know it's not very good. Veluza has a pretty decent attack stat of 102, but unfortunately, none of its other stats are even remotely close to 100. Including speed, which it needs more than McDonald's needs the dollar menu right now. Because instead of just giving this guy 100 speed for a completely reasonable base stat total of 508, that would only be marginally stronger than Flamigo, by the way, Game Freak decided to link this Pokemon's entire viability to its signature move, Fillet Away, which is basically like if Shell Smash had a baby with Belly Drum. Try not to envision that too hard. Doubling the attack, special attack, and speed stats of Veluza, but instead of dropping its defenses, it loses half of its total HP. Losing so much HP puts Veluza in a pretty vulnerable state, which means its chances to safely use this move are few and far between. Which is a shame, because otherwise Veluza learns a ton of fantastic moves by leveling up. Liquidation, Night Slash, and Psycho Cut to name a few. Unfortunately, none of them can get boosted by Sharpness due to it being a hidden ability, and it's very hard to get without beating the game and unlocking 6 and 7 star raids first. Water Psychic also doesn't do it many favors as a mid to late game Pokemon, as the only type specialists that Veluza outright beats by that point in the game are Aerie of Team Star and Rika in the Elite Four. But even then, better options exist. Paldea is no slouch when it comes to other good water and psychic types. There are many fish in the sea, as they say, and while Veluza is decent, it's certainly not the best catch in the ocean. Number 9, Satitan. Oh boy, a slow and frail ice-type Pokemon, a tale as bad and formulaic as an MCU movie. 5th phase. Oh well, surely this one will go differently than the dozens of other examples of flops from previous... Oh, it didn't? Well, color me surprised. Okay, to give it credit, Satitan is a very good HP tank, but sadly, its defenses do not hold up the fort as well as you'd expect. Which means this guy will be draining your Hyper Potions like Pokemon cards drain my bank account. While it can evolve right away from Citadel, it also lacks any great moves until it gets Ice Spinner at level 44. And most of its good TMs are gated until the end of the Starfall Street storyline. Say that 3 times fast. It doesn't help that Ice is also just not a very valuable type in Paldea. The ground-type titans of Great Tusk or Iron Treads are also part fighting or steel, so Titan is no help there. The dragon titans are actually the water-type Dondozo and the part water-type Tatsugiri, which cancels out Ice's winning matchup. So assuming you didn't save Brassius as the 8th gym leader, the only trainers Titan truly beats are Rika, Larry, and Hassel, all in the Elite Four. And even then, most of Rika's Pokemon carry moves that beat Ice, and Larry, Staraptor, and Flamigo can both fold Titan pretty easily. So with Titan being this region's only pure Ice-type Pokemon, you can see how the odds are pretty stacked against it. If you really want an Ice-type, you'd be better off going for Baxcalibur almost every time. Number 8, Grafaiai. Another perplexing case of a Pokemon, Grafaiai is our very first Poison Normal type, and well, it's about as mid of a type combination as that sounds. Now, Grafaiai is the first Pokemon in this video who I would say finally has somewhat okay stats, with an emphasis on attack and speed, which is great given that it learns Slash, U-Turn, and Poison Jab all relatively early. The problem is, who is it gonna use those moves on? The only trainers in the entire game that Grafaiai solidly beats are Brassius, who you should be able to beat with Pokemon much better than Shroodle, and Ortega, who, again, you should be able to beat with Pokemon much better than Grafaiai. Not to mention, if you do opt to catch Shroodle at the very beginning of the game, it probably takes the longest to evolve of all the early game Pokemon, waiting until level 28 to become Grafaiai. And by that point, Grafaiai is still far from the best mid-game Pokemon. Its 2 forms are just placed in very awkward spots in the game. And lastly, Grafaiai just pales in comparison to Paldea's premier poison type, Mr. Lightning McQueen himself, Revavroom. Being a poison steel type who is able to learn a litany of moves outside of its 2 types gives this devious car engine so much more versatility than Grafaiai. Number 7, Arboliva. Like Grafaiai, if you looked at Arboliva broadly speaking, you probably wouldn't see anything wrong with it right away. It has pretty great stats, reaches its final form at a decent level 35, and even has the Walmart Great Value brand of Grassy Surge as an ability, which, hey, still puts down grassy terrain at the end of the day. So why is it here? Well, because unlike most Pokemon on this list, it's really the beginning of the evolution line that brings the family down. Being stuck with Smoliv until level 25 is brutal, considering it's one of the game's weakest Pokemon and is more than likely to sit on the bench and collect EXP than it is to actually go out and fight. And that's just further solidified by all the early game matchups Smoliv loses. It's not even a good pick for Cloth, as its normal typing makes it weak to Rock Smash. Realistically, this family doesn't get a good fight until Kofu midway through the game, when it's nearing its Arboliva stage. And finally, when it becomes Arboliva, while its stats are finally good, this Pokemon is certainly a TM guzzler. Remember how I said that Grass-type Pokemon are seemingly stuck in Gen 2 when it comes to their level-up movesets? Well, yeah, Arboliva fits right into that camp. And since you can't obtain any good TMs like Earth Power, Dazzling Gleam, and Pollen Puff until late game, this is the grassiest grass type that is ever going to grass type. Like I said, when it's all said and done, Arboliva is not awful. It only gets better as the game progresses. The problem is just how long the runway is for a Pokemon that most people are probably adding to their team around the first gym. Whether or not all that suffering is worth it is up to you. Number 6, Bombardier. Or, stat-wise, essentially Veluza 2.0, but with worse typing. And just like Veluza, if Game Freak had just given this thing its dang hidden ability, Rocky Payload, during the main story, it wouldn't even be close to sniffing this list. Okay, maybe. It would be like 10th, or a dishonorable mention or something. Nowhere close to 6th, though. But yeah, Bombardier's biggest issue is its combination of typing and location, as Dark Flying means it only beats a select few opponents in the game, and since most players will have already beaten Katie and Brassius by the time they're able to catch Bombardier, the only opponents left in the game that it performs decently against are Rhyme and Tulip. And by that point in the game, its stats are not competing with most other late-game Dark types like Bisharp, Weavile, or even Low-Kicks who's available around the same time Bombardier is. Which is why Bombardier honestly would have been much better off just being a Rock type. The competition is not nearly as fierce in that department. But you know where the competition is fierce? Your YouTube homepage, which is why you should subscribe to my channel so you never miss a video. Please? Number 5, Rabsca. Speaking of Pokemon who match up against almost nobody well, this bug psychic type perfectly embodies this. As cool as Rabsca is, its low speed and average defenses do not keep this Pokemon healthy with its plethora of weaknesses. And its gimmick of reviving party members seems better suited for competitive play than an actual playthrough, because, you know, just buy a revive instead. What are you, broke? I know inflation's been bad, but this is Pokemon we're talking about. Now, here's the really good part about Rabsca. You can evolve it basically as soon as you catch Relor in Asado Desert, due to its evolution being tied to the Let's Go feature, so for a short period of time, you'll have a pretty superpowered early game bug. However, this also happens to be the section of the game with the most losing matchups for Rabsca, with Mela, Atticus, and Titan Earthworm all lurking relatively close to the level 26 mark you catch Relor at. Heck, I'll even throw Iono in there with her Mismagius. So, unfortunately, Rabsca's biggest selling point is quickly diminished by the foes it immediately has to fight. And after that, the rest of the game is a monumental struggle. Not only does Rabsca struggle to keep up stat-wise, but its best moves, Bug Buzz and Psychic, aren't learned until levels 45 and 50 respectively, which means for most of the game, it'll be relying on the relatively weak Struggle Bug as its primary bug move. Being a bug-type special attacker in general is just hard after Signal Beam got retired in Gen 8, may it forever rest in peace. Number 4, Oinkologne. Yeah, as much as I like to cut the first route Pokemon a break, Oinkologne could not be spared from the top 4. Though I will say its stats are remarkably high for such an early game Pokemon. 489, that's nearly a jump of 100 points compared to old generation early game normal types. And hey, they actually bothered to give both forms of Oinkologne different stats, unlike Meowstic, but they're not really different enough to help much. So while Oinkologne has pretty much the exact same shortcomings as all other early game normal types, I will say it is probably the single best early game tank you are going to get. If you are Nuzlocking, do not sleep on Oinkologne. This guy will probably get you out of some sketchy battles in the beginning. Honestly, Oinkologne is probably one of the best early game Pokemon that we have seen, so it pains me to put it this low on the list, but really that just speaks to how competitive Paldea's roster is. There are not many Pokemon in this region who are truly bad. Number 3, Wugtrio. This Pokemon is the definition of an outclassed water type. First off, as a water type physical attacker, this thing's only usable move as a Wiglet is going to be Aqua Jet. It's another one of those bad stat and type mismatches. But I guess I shouldn't be surprised when you just lazily copy and paste Dugtrio stats onto a new Pokemon. But hey, don't worry, once it evolves, it gets Triple Dive. A 90 power attack that takes entirely too long to execute for kids with TikTok brains to stay engaged with the game. How in the world is this Pokemon supposed to win against Palafin? Heck, forget Palafin, Dondozo, Floatzel, or basically any other water-type Pokemon with a secondary type and better coverage? It pretty much pales in comparison to everything except maybe Golduck. Point is, this is not the region to be a subpar water type in, because they brought back almost all the heavy hitters in this dex. Wugtrio sadly cannot compete. Number 2, Squawkabilly. For some reason, one bad parrot Pokemon just wasn't enough for Game Freak, as they decided to remake Chatot with arguably even fewer redeeming qualities, a feat that most of mankind deemed impossible for many years. But just like putting a man on the moon, we somehow managed to do the impossible. Though, I guess if this Pokemon has one redeeming factor, it's that it's the most early game pilled Pokemon I've ever seen. Aerial Ace at level 13, the first 2 gyms being Bug and Grass? Yeah, he can do a little bit of work. But you know what other flying-type Pokemon is found equally as early but has stats that actually keep it relevant throughout the entire game? Flamigo! Why would you ever use Squawkabilly when Flamigo is equally as easy to obtain with better moves, better typing, and better longevity? Seriously, Flamigo has a base stat total of 500 and is found on this game's equivalent of Route 2. It actually displaces so many flying types it's not even funny. No wonder it's the undisputed speedrun champ of Scarlet and Violet. Squawkabilly also has one of the worst move pools for any Gen 9 Pokemon, as it's built exclusively as a physical attacker, leaving its best moves as Brave Bird, U-Turn, and Double Edge. Which, in case you haven't noticed, is not very good coverage. And 2 of those moves do recoil, which is not great news for a Pokemon as frail as this one. Sadly, there just really isn't a reason to ever use this Pokemon. For this region's dishonorable mentions, we have to start with Scovillain. Certainly one of the weirdest Pokemon to come out of Gen 9, I absolutely love Scovillain. I only wish I loved its stats as much as I love its design. With 65 defenses across the board, Scovillain is one of this generation's frailest fully evolved Pokemon, with a measly 75 speed not doing much for it. Fortunately, between Flamethrower and Seed Bomb, this Pokemon is really good offensively, even with a relatively shallow move pool. And Sunny Day with Chlorophyll at least lets it patch up its mediocre speed. And since Stone Evolutions had their moves fixed in Gen 9, there is literally no downside to evolving Capsakid as soon as you catch one in the Western Province. So you can have a pretty powerful Scovillain with winning matchups against trainers like Brassius, Kofu, and the Titan Earthworm at the right time. And for the most part, Scovillain's matchup spread against most of the game's notable trainers stays pretty good through the end of the game. The only major downside of this Pokemon is that you'll just have to look out for faster, harder hitting foes in almost every battle. And our only other dishonorable mention is Gholdengo. Yes, despite Pokemon number 1000 being a massive marketing king and one of this generation's strongest competitive Pokemon, using one in a main story playthrough is an incredible drag. Gimmighoul is designed to be one of the most useless Pokemon in the game. It's only a slight step above Cosmog and Cosmoem. It likely won't be until the very end of the game that you have enough Gimmighoul coins to evolve into Gholdengo. Unless you are so dedicated to this Pokemon that you exclusively hunt the coins before doing any of the story. But there is no denying that Gholdengo is incredibly powerful, so despite how much of a drag it is to get this Pokemon on your team, it could absolutely not break into the top 10. And number 1, Spidops. I wish I could say this Pokemon is number 1 for any reason beside its stats and typing, but man, that's all that really needs to be said. Mono Bug, already we have the worst type in the game. Don't say it's Ice in the comment section either, just admit you're stuck in 2019. And with a base stat total of 404, aside from Squawkabilly, no other fully evolved Pokemon comes even remotely close to matching how bad its stats are. Though, Lokix only has a base stat total of 450, and he's also a bug type, yet somehow, he's one of the strongest Pokemon in the game. So how does Spidops feel like he's on an entirely different planet compared to Lokix? Well, mostly, stat distribution, lack of good abilities, at least in single player. Stakeout is pretty good for competitive, which is sad because with a few small adjustments, Spidops could be a much better Pokemon. If you made him bug fighting type, maybe gave him 20 more points in attack and gave him literally anything other than Insomnia as a primary ability, okay, he'd probably still be a bottom 2 Pokemon in this region, but he'd at least be usable. Right now, he really does just feel like the one Pokemon from this region that Game Freak forgot to give anything good to. Almost every Pokemon in this region, even the ones like Squawkabilly and Oinkologne, have something going for them. Not Spidops, though. And so, with that, we have concluded our worst Pokemon in every region series. For now. Be sure to leave a like if you enjoy, subscribe for more videos just like this one, and I'll see you guys next time.